It says it's showtime.
That's
So
it.
everyone, welcome to covering the Russia-Ukraine war with data, brought to you by the Sigma Awards and
Everyone,
datajournalism.com.
welcome.
And we're powered by European Journalism Center, and both projects are supported by Google News Initiative. So a big thanks to them. I'm Tara Kelly, data editor for datajournalism.com, and I'll be moderating this event with Marianne Bouchard, who joins us from the Sigma Awards. Hi, Marianne.
Hello.
Audience, please say hello in the chat. Sorry, in the comments, and introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from. Yeah, we want to know who you are. And throughout the event, don't hesitate to also, share your comments and your thoughts. Uh, yeah, we want you to be involved in this, so don't be a stranger. So, Ukraine is facing a pivotal moment in the Russian invasion. For the past 4 months, the world has witnessed everything from alleged war crimes to propaganda, as well as mis and disinformation, alongside mass migration coupled with rising inflation, alongside what seems to be a food and energy crisis. Just as the coronavirus served as a watershed moment for audiences to understand the value of professional independent journalism and verified information, so too is the Russian Ukraine war. But what does the role of data journalism play in this war? And how can data journalists use open source investigation techniques and data to report what is happening in Ukraine with accuracy and authority? And how can we leverage this moment to spur innovation in our storytelling to fight war fatigue among audiences? To help data journalists navigate this, we put together a half-day program of 3 sessions followed by a series of lightning talks examining recent war coverage through data. Our first event will highlight some noteworthy pieces of data journalism focusing on the war with Texty.ua, The Insider, OCCRP, ACAPS, and we also have the next event, which is a panel focusing on OSINT investigations with the New York Times, AFP, and Bellingcat. And of course, our final panel will cover innovation in the newsroom with CNN and the Financial Times. And we'll conclude with a couple of lightning talks from the Fixed Media and Zeit Online. Now, before we begin, let me emphasize a couple of housekeeping points. Each panel will last 45 minutes, followed by 10 minutes for questions from the audience. So please, again, type those questions in the comments. You're welcome to ask, and share your thoughts, as I said before. I should also point out that this will be recorded, and we're going to turn this into a Conversations with Data podcast, maybe even a few podcasts. We'll see how it goes. And the Sigma Awards also plans to write some articles about the key learnings from the event, and we may do so too on datajournalism.com. So if the audience, once again, please join us in the comments and share your thoughts. And now I'm handing the mantle over to you, Marianne, for the first session.
Thank you, Tara. Yes, so this first session was designed to help us understand the challenges of covering the Russia-Ukraine war with data, to get tips and advice on what data sources to use, and to learn how such data sets are being put together. So to do so, we've lined up 4 incredible speakers. First one up is Peter. Bodnar is a data journalist at Texty, Ukraine's data journalism top dog. We also have Dada Lindell, data journalist from Russia, now at The Insider, the partner of Bellingcat from Russian issues and war coverage. And we also have Karina Shedrovsky, head of research at OCCRP. And finally, we will hear in this first panel from Claudia Manili, who is the senior data analyst from ACAPS. Hello to you four. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's really a big honor to be able to gather experts from Russia and Ukraine today, as well as representative from a data gathering organization for this session. We'll have a 10-minute Q&A at the end of this panel. But for people watching, don't hesitate to react to what's being said and ask your question along the way. we'll try and cover those at the end. So let's try and begin with some questions. True. The first two questions I have are specific for Peter and Dada here, because you guys have been covering this pretty much from the ground. How did you react when the conflict intensified earlier this year? Had you worked on stories tackling the relationship between Russia and Ukraine before? What sort of measures have you had to take to ensure your physical and digital security?
I don't know, Petro, would you mind if I start? Because I see that you're silent. So when the war began, I was still in Moscow, in Russia, because until the very end, I didn't want to leave the country. And yeah, when the war began, that was like we were kind of prepared to it. I mean, every day before the war began, we discussed like, will it eventually start or not? Because we collected data and we and somehow participated in the research mostly made by Central Intelligence Team, a Russian team of OSINT investigators that since November told us that Russia brings the weaponry, the people to the western border, to Belarus, to the Ukrainian border. So every day, I think, before the war, we were discussing with some of our sources if it will start or not. But eventually we realized that it will start on February 24th. Like, I mean, several hours before. It was kind of obvious. And I think that the very first days, since I am somehow like myself as an activist, I always speak to people and speak about their digital security and physical security because I'm kind of paranoid. I started working not only with the newsrooms that I know in Russia, but with all the activists, lots of people who were preoccupied with their digital security, and it was the time to give some personal or group advices to people about their digital security, about what happens if they like leave us without internet connection or something, what happens if police takes your phones, and if you discuss it. That was even before like several days after the war began. They made new Russian legislation that prevents you to name the war being the war, and they also pronounced that if you collect data about Russian military, you will be accused of state treason. And since that, everyone from many newsrooms that made investigative journalism, specifically from Insider, we had to leave the country because it was like very, very dangerous for us to stay there. Also, since the very first days, we were interested in, and even before the war, we were interested in collecting data about what happens on the border, where are people, where are weaponry, how can we kind of, if we cannot prevent it, just we can tell like what happens there and who is there and so on. So that was another case for me and for not only for journalists, but also for activists, how to collect information about people who are there, how do we verify their personalities, because since the very first days, we had lots of photos, videos, some just news, some pieces of texts that said this person was killed there, this person is detained or something. So we had to collect all this data and to verify, and I know that lots of activists and journalist teams make this. I consulted several teams that try to make social networks of people and try to verify their personalities, and that is like speaking about digital security and about data. Speaking about physical security, that means that mostly all the journalists in Russia had to leave the country. Like all the investigative journalists and all the journalists who were just afraid with their lives, of their freedom, they had to leave the country, mostly. Like, I think that maybe 80% at least.
Okay. And what about you, Peter?
Yeah, hello. I'm grateful for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about our experience. Our team, we were writing about Russia waging war against Ukraine for the last 8 years. I was a part of it for the last 5 years. So the full-scale invasion wasn't such a big surprise for us. We expected it one way or another, one day or another. I think we started understanding that something is going to happen at the beginning of the last year, where first reports came about Russian troops concentrating around Ukrainian borders. And this is the moment when we decided to create a project which we later created that was tracking amount of military equipment in Russian military bases around Ukrainian border. Talking about the starting point of this war on the 24th of February, it was a very messy and unexpected time, I'd say. Even though we had plans and we understood that something like that could happen, when the war starts, most of things don't go according to the plan fully. But anyway, what we've done, we've moved most of our critical digital infrastructure into the remote cloud, because we had some computing and some data storage in our local computers in our office. We also ensured the digital protection for our computers and for our accounts, access to databases, everything we need for our work, and which is critical for us. What else we've done? We also created a plan about how can our team members evacuate from Kyiv. We are working from Kyiv, capital of Ukraine, and more or less it worked according to that plan. And we also had some backup plans on what to do and where to go in case if internet connection and mobile connection disappears fully. Thankfully, we didn't have to check how those plans would have gone, because internet connection was stable throughout the last 4 months. But anyway, lots of things changed. Two of our team members, our editor, our deputy editor, and our news editor, they got enlisted in Ukrainian army, so our team got a little bit smaller. And I think that's like major points. And about what else we were doing prior to this full-scale invasion, we also done a lot of explanatory articles about how military is built and how it works. We had a nice visual explanatory article describing what is battalion tactical groups and other elements of army which were further used in this invasion. And we also worked a lot with the topic of disinformation. We have our own database of news articles and propaganda articles from a variety of Russian official websites and affiliated with the government websites. We analyze them and try to identify important topics and discuss how those topics illustrate actual Russian policy towards Ukraine. Yeah.
Great, and that brings us to the next point I wanted to chat with you too. If you could very quickly show us like an example of the coverage you've done so far that you feel embodies well the work of your organization on the Russia-Ukraine war, that'd be great. Peter, maybe you could start, because you were just talking about some of them.
Sure.
Something you can showcase? You can share your screen.
I'll share my screen. And window. Just give me a second. Chrome on tab. Yeah, I think one of the most important articles before the war was article tracking military bases around Ukrainian border. We used active radar, active satellite, satellite with active radar. I think it's this is the way it's called. This is a Sentinel-1 satellite, and we use it to identify how what is the area covered by basically covered by metal objects on the territory of Russian military bases around Ukrainian borders. Also, I hope you see another tab.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, here is this explainer what it is BTG or Battalion Tactical Group for our readers, and
wait, no, we can see this other.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I view. Stop sharing. Just give me a second. Share screen. Screen one. So I'll do it this way. Yeah. That's. So you see another article, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this one, it describes how what is a battalion tactical group. It is basically a basic unit comprising Russian army in this invasion. And for example, prior to the war, we also done an article on how lightning change on satellite images of both of the territories of Ukraine, which are currently controlled by government, and territories of Ukraine currently controlled by Russia. And I wanted to show one more thing. Sorry. Yeah. So the project we created after war started is war videos chronology. We collect videos about war, and we store them on our server, and we allow our users to check which were videos about war, about basically battles, about all kinds of events, using either a calendar or just plainly checking videos and looking for information they are looking for. So this kind of work, classifying, storing information, making information useful for the public and reused by other teams is a very important aspect of our work. So I think these are the projects that embody our approach in a lot of ways.
That's amazing. Thank you very much for sharing those with us. I'm sure we're going to have lots of comments on this in the comments tabs. We're going to make sure to get those links together and also share it with people watching us now.
Yeah, sure. I'll share any links.
Thank you very much. What about you, Dada? Share away.
Okay. Thank you, Petro. That was kind of incredible. And I will show the very other thing, because Petro showed us how they work with data, right? And how they work with satellite imagery and so on and so forth. We do that too. I first have to kind of tell you a couple of things that for me, I think it was like a major change since the war began. Not only that we have to evacuate like all our team members, and we were all in different countries in very different conditions, and like that was kind of incredible. So on something, on some kind of on some investigations, our work had to stop. We had to stop work, or we didn't publish lots of investigations that were before the war, because now they kind of like, why would we publish this? Because the war continues. I had to learn a lot about social engineering, though I was always a data person, and on the other hand, a cybersec person. But I had to learn a lot about social engineering, because now you don't only like search and collect and gather all the data, but you have to speak to lots of different people who will not speak to you because you are a journalist, because you tell that the war is the war, or and so on and so forth. And also what the Insiders team did, and that's incredible. I'm not like a very big part of it, but I want to show you this, is that they started. And how do I share screen? Right.
Yeah.
So if I share screen, yeah, right. So do you see the YouTube channel, right? Is it? No? What do you see?
No. You need to click on the share screen button and then.
Oh, Chrome has lost permission to capture your screen. Oh, sorry, we didn't check it before the stream. Sorry to all auditory.
Share a link with me.
So I can share a link with you. Okay, I will share a link with you. So I will show you the very other thing. It's not about like data gathering and all this kind of thing. It's just a small explanatory video, and the video team became one of the core teams in the Insider team because, first of all, even because even since everyone had to flee and we have to leave our places, they created like improvised studio, like a small studio in a small room in one of like post-Soviet countries, and I'm not sure shall I tell in which one or not. And this is a small explanatory video that gained 1 million of views, though the channel is not very big yet, and it just has some information of why Russians go to Ukraine, and Russian is like what they tell it, like the second army in the world. But we see just lots of videos from the social networks, and this small video is all based on social networks videos. And we see that it has like it loses people, it loses all the equipment, it loses all the tanks, everything. And this video tries to explain why this happens. And they made lots of these short explanatory videos of how would you speak to your relatives that don't believe that war in Ukraine exists, because it's like, I think at least half of Russians don't believe that there is a war in Ukraine. They tell this is not a war.
Mm-hmm.
How shall you speak to your relatives? How you will not get mad about it? Why lots of people die in Ukraine? What happens there? And so on and so forth. They also made a YouTube channel with news and like other kind of news, because since all the media in Russia are closed now and YouTube still works, they made a stack on this YouTube channel. And see, even if the channel is not like very, very big now, because Navalny's channel is bigger, or some libertarian channels are bigger than this channel, but it's not just about talking of people to people, it's also about telling about military, telling about like military equipment, telling about the war, what happens in different regions of Ukraine, because we think that this is very important now. It's not like discussing who are good Russians and who are bad Russians, because many people in Russia now discuss this, but we want to show people what like how the war goes on. Also, for sure, we collect all the we collect lots of data. We just don't publish it like Texty does. We collect lots of data. We try to collect data in some ways that before the war I would consider it to be not ethical. Like I would never work with some like face recognition systems before the war. I would never work with like leaked emails before the war. Now I think sometimes I do, and some of my colleagues do too, because like now if you want to know who were the people in Bucha that made all these like unmanly things, we will have to go to a face recognition system to try to learn who they are.
Mm-hmm. And we will be talking about
things that changed. Yeah, these are things that changed, and I will for sure not show you some great examples of working with data, because I think even before the war, the Insider, as well as the Texty, as well as the iStories media, we all were on a pretty good, like on a high level of data journalism, I suppose, because I think that we have not seen it like in many newsrooms all over the world. And now we have to just, I don't know, apply all our skills. and try to do as much as we can. I don't know, try to name all the people who make these like war crimes and so on. That's it.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for sharing that with us. That's really interesting, and that leads us to actually we are in a good in a good flow of introducing you guys, and so I thought we could also get to hear from Karina now. Karina, I'm going to bring you to the stage, if you don't mind. I mean, at OCCRP, you've been working with data in different languages, right, on various topics involving crime and corruption. And how does this conflict in Ukraine stands out or relates even to other topics that you've worked on before?
Yeah. Hi. So I think that in a lot of ways, it is very similar. I think we're going to talk a little bit about the Russian asset tracking project that we did, which is basically a collection of assets of oligarchs and Putin's inner circle that we decided to track their assets around the world. I can talk a little bit more about that project in a bit, but with that project, it's very similar to the work that we've been doing all along, following the money, getting public records around the world and trying to uncover assets that are quite difficult to uncover. What was different is kind of the sense of urgency that we all of a sudden had once Russia invaded Ukraine. We've always been doing this, but everything just felt really important and really urgent. And within, I think, 2 weeks, we managed to uncover billions of dollars of assets, working endless hours, barely sleeping, just to kind of get this information out. So I would say that that's a bit different. And then just in terms of all of the other leaks that have been, released since the war began, everything seems really important. Everything, you don't really know what the agenda is of who's actually leaking this information. So what's also different is just, trying to go through this information with that lens and decide what is worth looking into, what is worth covering. And it's just vast, vast amounts of data. And, with that sense of urgency from the public, from colleagues who are also trying to cover this in the best way that they can, it has definitely been a challenge to kind of sift through this data and try to understand what actually is important and what we can, make a story out of, I'd say.
And so, yeah, you were just mentioning it a second ago. Can you tell us more about this project of yours, the Russian asset tracker you've developed? How did the idea come about, and what were the challenges that you faced while making it?
Yeah. So we published this project. It's actually still ongoing. It's called the Russian Asset Tracker. We started off by identifying a number of oligarchs or people closest to Putin. And the idea was to make a comprehensive database of their assets that are fact checkable and basically proven, which sounds simple. It's actually really difficult. There have been stories coming out basically from news media all over the world about different assets that are being uncovered. The idea was to have kind of a one massive database where it's all there. And where we can say confidently that we believe that these are the assets that belong to these individuals. So that was kind of how the idea came about. We started adding more people to the database as time went on. Like I said, it was really a massive undertaking. So we started small and we're continuing to add assets. And the idea was, there's tons of information. A story may come out about Abramovich's yacht or Usmanov's villa. But the idea was to say, okay, we actually got the documents. Our fact-checking team, which is incredible, basically, went from point A to point B, and we were able to prove without a doubt that these assets belong to these individuals. We've recently added a section of reported assets. As a lot of people probably know, these people go through incredible lengths to hide their ownership. This information is not easy to uncover. Even if we can get records, their names are very rarely actually listed in the data itself. So we have to do a lot of digging and background information to actually tie these assets to these individuals. So we do now have a section where there are some reported assets that are, there's a lot of proof and evidence that it does belong to them, but we're not necessarily, we weren't able to actually fact check it with the documents themselves. So yeah, we used a number of public records. Sometimes it was quite simple, just going to a land registry, but oftentimes we had to get a bit creative. We, like you're showing an airplane now, we did a lot of plane tracking to show, not only if someone owns an aircraft, but we actually used it to see if they were flying to a specific destination often, to prove that they're still connected to the villa that we thought they might have been. The same with yacht tracking. So we had to kind of think outside of the box a bit, and use kind of all of the asset tracking skills that we've been, using for all of our stories in the past, and bring them all together in a really short time period to pull this project together.
Wow, that looks like a mind-blowing data work. Definitely. How many of you guys were on this project?
So I should have pulled up the numbers. So there was 50s, I think it says on the website exactly how many partners, but that was also what was, super incredible about this, was that this is, was because it was such a massive undertaking, we had partners from all over the world that really, it was an all hands on deck type project, where we had, because there was tons of assets all over Europe, and we had basically partners in every single country that was able to help us, pull the data that we needed and actually get the information. I think it was 50 plus news organizations that actually participated in this project and are still continuing to participate. So it was a kind of really cool chance to kind of, all get together and put a mix of different regional and language expertise to really good use.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Carolina, for sharing that with us. Now, Claudia, as I said earlier when I introduced this panel, we are very lucky to not just have data journalists come and share their experiences, but also to have experts from other horizons to come and talk to us. And you are a great example of that, Claudia. You work at ACAPS, and can you first of all introduce a bit yourself and ACAPS, and tell us how long you've been collecting and analyzing data on Ukraine?
Thanks for the invitation, first of all, and we are very happy to be here. So what ACAPS is, we are not journalists, we are analysts mainly and data collectors active in the humanitarian sector, which means mainly either natural disaster response or conflict, like this case. And what we try to do is we try to inform basically the humanitarian community on what is going on in specific situations. We have teams around the world that are focusing on crisis. We have one team on Ukraine, and we have global analysis as well.
Great.
I am Claudia, so I am a senior data analyst of the global team, but I was helping the Ukraine team in the data collection. So I guess that's why I'm here. So about Ukraine, we have been collecting data since late March. So since we're not journalists, the humanitarian response sometimes takes a little bit more to be activated in all these assets. Let's say humanitarian response are big, sectorial. There is analysis as well in the response. So it takes sometimes a while. We decided to take action at the end of March when we felt there was the need to be there in terms of analysis. And we decided to build mainly two data sets, one on civilian infrastructure damages and the other one on humanitarian access events. So it's easier to explain civilian infrastructure damages, meaning that that's what it is. So we were tracking damages related to whatever was a civilian infrastructure with damages, so no buildings, because that would not be possible. And on the other side, the humanitarian access events data set is more related to whatever is relevant for humanitarian actors to know to access a specific place.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
that's...
Yeah, sorry. Could you quickly show us the two main data resources from ACAPS on Ukraine? That could be quite useful for data journalists watching today. First, we have the interactive dashboard and something called the crisis indicators.
Can you confirm that you see it?
I can add that to the stream now. Yeah.
Okay, great, perfect. So here, that's the landing page of our data sets. You have two interactive dashboards. One is presenting the damages to civilian infrastructure. So we didn't include anything that was military. And this is the other one on, if it's working, it's kind of stuck. No, it's going. So this is presenting the humanitarian access events framed in the indicators that we use in the humanitarian sector. Quite focused on the humanitarian sector, though. Whatever you see, it's cumulative. It's number of recorded events. And in this case, it's number of recorded damages to facilities. We did it with 5 data collectors, 3 of them not Russian speaker, not Ukrainian speaker, and then we added 2 resources, of course, knowing a little bit more about the context. We don't have just this. We also collect data at the global level. So I think it's worth mentioning because this might be helping also your work in reporting about the Ukraine conflict. Being global, this means that you can collect indicators at global level, so on many different conflicts. And you can see like a perspective of our analysis of a crisis here in this page. But you can download something that is called Inferenciality Index, which is a tool that puts together a variety of indicators in many different crises around the world and weights them to be comparable to each other. So if I try to select, for example, Ukraine, our crisis in Ukraine is here, conflict in Ukraine, I see the score compared to everything else. So in this case, humanitarian-wise, the severity score, so the severity of humanitarian needs inside Ukraine per our indicator are scoring pretty high because we have like the highest score in the crisis severity. So I think that this was worth presenting for to give data journalists a perspective that one thing is analyzing a conflict per se, but there is a certain point where you might want to compare conflicts around the world and situation to understand them better, of course.
Great. And so, well, thank you very much for this, Claudia. I'm sure we're going to get also tons of questions about this and maybe very geeky questions on how on earth do you coordinate such a big data gathering on a daily basis. We might come to that at the end. We only have about 10-15 minutes left for us to chat together before we get to those questions. So what I'd like to do is to throw at the 4 of you some general questions about working with data on the Russia-Ukraine war. The first one is going to be, because this session is about, helping people watching, finding what are your reliable sources of data. We've just mentioned one example, maybe people didn't know before, that is ACAPS and a few other mentioned by our speakers today. Maybe we could add to that list. So where can journalists find reliable data on Russia-Ukraine war? That would be quite useful to our community. And what advice do you have on how to use or interpret these data that we can find online? I'm going to bring everybody on stage for this, so you're all welcome to answer. Do you have yourselves like a document with a list of the different reliable sources you use every day to get data from? And what is it?
Maybe I can go like very, very quickly. Like we have some sources that we use. However, since it's highly politicized and everything, it's very difficult. So my like the advice that I give to analysts and to data collectors, and I feel to journalists as well, triangulation of whatever information you find. Try to see if it's reported in other sources, how it is reported. That's pretty much the first advice. And if you manage to find a data provider, try to understand how the data was collected. And if there is transparency there on limitations, then they might be reliable. But always try to verify.
Sure. Thank you. Dada, Peter, Karina?
I suppose if you say about like what information shall I believe to, I would again say about verification. So either it's verification made by you or it's verification made by someone who you trust. Like I trust to CIT, Central Intelligence Team, which is Russian group of activists. I trust to myself, my colleagues, I trust to Bellingcat, I trust to OSINT, and namely, mostly that is it. I don't know, I trust to Amnesty probably. That's it, right? But I mean, it's pretty much pretty many sources. I just for me, it's just like you look at the photo or you look at the footage, you look at the video, and if you are interested in it, if you're interested in what happens there, you try to understand what happens there. If you see a piece of news which touches me a lot because I'm from Donbass myself originally, and if I see a piece of news that there was a strike to like a huge blasts in Donetsk market, all I want to know probably who made it, right? And if is this even possible to know who made it? When there were when the siege of Mariupol began, I was like, I mean, I think for 2 weeks, all I wanted to be there because I could not trust anything, any piece of information that goes from there, because you understand that both parties can lie. That's obvious. And even now, again, because Mariupol is under siege, not under siege, but under control of Russian military and some Russian, I don't know, polittechnologists or people. The both worlds are bad for them. All I want is just to be there and to see with my eyes what happens there, because I cannot trust anything except what I have seen with my eyes, right? Or what the eyes of the reporter that I know have seen, or someone that I can trust have seen, someone who can critically assess this information. So this is just verification. And but if you tell about like your sources, some sources that give you data, I think if you cannot just double check it, like for example, if someone gives me a leak and I can somehow double check it, get the same leak from the same, like, I don't know, make some hacking it or something like this. If I can double check it in this way, obviously I have to ask several people who can know something. That's probably what Claudia says, like triangulation, what she calls, right? But this is the very same standards that we had before the war, actually, because we always had information from several sources. Or better, if we can see it ourselves, like someone tells us there is a mansion owned by this oligarch or by this deputy of state parliament. We have to check the documents, we have to go there, we have to have our drones, we have to film everything, and that's how we are sure that this thing exists and it is as big and maybe as expensive or something as I were told. And the same about war. I don't see any other kind of standards. I see that probably my ethical standards, like mine and my colleagues, are somehow changed, because as I already told, sometimes we now use the instrument that for me were completely prohibited to use. I would not let myself before the war. Now I let myself because I want to make people, like, how do you say it, like, go to jail. Okay. I want to make people make those people who made this work crimes go to jail at least. And that's why I let myself use some other instruments, but that is it. That is it. This is just verification technologies, techniques are the same.
Sure, I get that.
I'll just add, I'll echo what Claudia and Dada said about verifying data. I had mentioned, the way at OCCRP we're covering the war a bit differently than journalists that are covering it on a daily and more, news-driven basis. But I had mentioned that, there have been a lot of leaks. So just in terms of a source to look at that information, though, the provenance of it is not very clear, the motivation of those who leaked the information is not very clear as well. But we have made a lot of this information available on our data platform called Aleph. So journalists can apply for access and get access to, look through this data and decide for themselves what is, considered newsworthy. But like Dada and Claudia had said, there's a lot of work that obviously needs to be done to make sure that what they're looking at is in fact newsworthy and worth publishing online.
And so we talked a lot about the data that is already there. Some of you have had to, pretty much all of you, have had to compile yourself some data sets to cover the conflict properly. So we can pretty much say that collecting the data, the data work is one of the big challenges of covering this this war. What's the missing data today? What data does not exist but you wish it did to cover this this conflict?
I can just quickly add, for us with, especially in the framework of the Russian asset tracking project, it shouldn't be this difficult to track the assets of these people. So ultimate beneficial ownership registries around the world, more available real estate databases in Europe, et cetera. This is information that, should be quite transparent and isn't. And I think it became super clear to the rest of the world that this is a massive problem that, really needs to be addressed and hopefully is.
And so we see a lot of similar reports being done by news organizations around the world on this conflict. We obviously see maps updated daily, death counts, assets listing, etc. What do you feel are the missing narratives that you wish more journalists tackled covering the Ukraine-Russia war? Do you think there's
maybe
something?
I'll try. If I may. Yeah, that's just my point of view. Maybe I've missed something, but I think that humanitarian impact of the war and the very impact on a local basis in a specific cities, problems with access to the fresh water, infrastructure damage, a lot of stories connected to this. And infrastructure, damage to the roads, bridges, and how daily life of ordinary people changed during the war. I think this part of picture is pretty much missing, or at least not that covered as military activity, some economic activity, and politics.
Cool.
I might maybe add up on that. In the humanitarian sector, there is a tentative on tracking this type of damages, but they might not be the easiest to consult, sometimes data sets. But on this purpose, I think that for humanitarian purposes, for example, one of the narrative missing is when things are also improving to let the humanitarians in. For example, if a bridge is destroyed, it's very easy to report on that because you will see a bombing somewhere and that's reported. But this cut off access, and for the humanitarians, it's useful to understand if the situation somewhere improves to be able to access it as well. So that's a very difficult thing to track if you track damages when they improve it. And that's a narrative that for us is missing. But yeah, it's maybe asking too much.
Well, thank you. One last question before we get to questions, because you four are quite used now to tackling this this topic. I'd like to get you to give us tips or advice that you could give to other data journalists around the world that are not used to this conflict, maybe didn't have any prior knowledge of the history between Russia and Ukraine. What tips would you give them on how to cover these conflicts with data? Any advice on how to understand the conflict properly, or how to cover it properly?
Always check where is your information from, not just like data in terms of numbers, figures. Every kind of information, always double check, triple check. I don't know how many times you have to check, but check everything what you try to report about, because I have seen lots of times when journalists who consider themselves to be very like true to life or very objective, who report on things that already are proved not to be true or are not obvious if they're true or not, and they just make it because I think that many people now became like not objective, and it's really hard to still be objective since the very first. Like I remember after the first week when I found myself that I can't trust myself anymore. I can't trust my own assessment to things anymore. I was not sure if I am objective now, but I have seen lots of people and lots of reports that they are happy to report about anything that proves their points of view. Like my point of view, for example, someone's point of view is that all Russians are orcs and everyone should be killed, and they just pick all kind of information to prove it. Other point of view, the same, like for Ukrainians, the same, for some other people, the same. For some nation minorities, how they call it in Russia, the same. For example, like, I don't know, Tatars tell that, here we go, here how Russians oppress us, and we just pick information and that's it. And I don't know how many times you have to check. Probably it's not that every piece of information is worth sharing. I don't know. Always try to estimate if you still are kind of objective or not. If you try to be a journalist, if you are not a journalist, if you became an activist, I think that you can do kind of anything since you are an activist. But I still consider myself more of a journalist. I'm an activist, but in other fields, like in field of cybersecurity, probably I'm an activist, but in field of information, I still am not. But that is it. That is about piece of advice. And for people who work in newsrooms, I think that they have to teach themselves how to still, in many times, how to search for data, how to search for footages, how to search for images, how to verificate the images and photos. And I think I already have held, I don't know, several just workshops. Even I was invited by people who I didn't even know that they like work on something, how to verificate photos and images. And also I think that many newsrooms have to teach themselves how to work with satellite imagery, because at this very moment we still have access to satellite imagery which is free of charge, which is somehow like everyone can get it if they have some kind of knowledge how to get it, how to analyze it. And that was a very beautiful example of what Petro showed us, right? Like if there is some metal infrastructure in this place, and we just compare it, that there was no and now there is, and that already makes us some incentives to think about what happens there. And I see now that almost no one in lots of newsrooms that I talked to, they don't know how to use the satellite imagery at all. They don't know how to get it. They don't know how to analyze it, how to compare them, how to use them. But still, they can imagine lots of beautiful reports that could be made with it, but they don't know how to. Probably this is one of like instruments which is underused.
Thank you very much. Peter, what tips would you give someone who hasn't worked on the conflict before and have to produce some data-driven piece in his newsroom?
I agree with those tips that Dada proposed. And what I could add is maybe try to familiarize yourself a little bit with local historical and cultural context. For example, like the story a friend of mine told me about a journalist asking him if he can, if my friend can show that journalist, how was it? Basically a part of the city in Kyiv, Ukraine, where Russian speakers live. And it's just a plain impossible situation in Ukraine. There is no this kind of special stratification, which maybe exists in other countries, but it's just doesn't work like that in Ukraine. So I think some basic familiarity about moods, viewpoints, and the cultural specific features of the population in the area of conflict could be very useful while doing even the data-driven stories.
Awesome. Thank you.
Probably I would say more, just familiarize yourself with the history, probably, from different sources. I don't know, that would be useful for many journalists, I suppose, because since I was in Europe, I had to explain to many people here and for journalists too what actually happens in Ukraine, because and that it started 8 years ago, because they just had no idea what happens. I mean, they just, something happens now, where is this Ukraine, and so on and so forth. That was like striking out.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we just have a few minutes now. I'm going through the questions and the comments we had on YouTube. So if you hear this, don't hesitate to add to it. If you want to, we might get a minute to do that. The first question I have is actually from the European Journalism Center, asking you, Claudia, how big is the data team collecting this information on Ukraine, and has your criteria for collecting the data changed over the course of the war?
5 data collectors, and the criteria, yes, they change, because when you structure a data set, you think to find something, and then the more you go on and you realize that you might have chosen categories, indicators, or you might have structured your data sets in a way that is not flexible enough to come up with the new challenges and new things that you might encounter. So yeah, the more you get inside the process of collecting and inside the situation itself, and things are changing. And this is valid Ukraine, and in my experience in many other data sets, let's say.
Cool. We have another question from Aranksa Erans. Sorry if I misspell your name. It's a question to Karina, actually, to know about the Russian asset tracker. If you have found out in your investigation which country are the majority of the Russian oligarchs' assets, what's the country that gathers the more assets?
Yeah, what we've actually found was that it really is truly global. There are a number of jurisdictions that are more popular for different types of assets. For example, Isle of Man was very popular for private aircraft, Cayman Islands, and was really popular for yachts. And then there's companies in the UK and Cyprus, etc. So it really was truly global. And what we've been paying a lot of attention to now is that as some countries are deciding to seize assets and sanction these individuals, is where's the money actually going? And these are, countries where there's no indication that they are going to sanction these individuals and seize the assets. And a big jurisdiction that's been coming up a lot is the UAE, and specifically Dubai. So yeah, I mean, it really is a truly global network of assets, but we are noticing patterns in where the money has been moving since the war started.
Cool. Thank you very much for that. Next question is from Christina Costa. Really interesting, actually. Do you see the tendency of also European authorities not making data more accessible? When we're talking about who are your trusted sources of data, we haven't mentioned whether you guys do use regularly data from the European Union data portals or the UN portals, or the usual suspects we use in lots of different and other data projects. What do you have to say about that? Anyone can comment on this? Do you feel that, yeah?
I mean, for us, it has been, this isn't anything new, but when we're looking at assets, like I had mentioned before, it's been, quite shocking if we're trying to uncover a villa in Italy that it's owned by an Austrian company, an Italian company, and then a Liechtenstein trust at the end. And because of a leak, we were able to prove that someone owns this Liechtenstein trust. So, data may be available in some sort of way, right? The documents are available for purchase. The fact, sometimes you have to spend a ton of money just to even get those documents. So I wouldn't even really say they're accessible to everybody. But even when the data is actually available, that doesn't actually help us necessarily uncover who's truly behind these assets. So this is a major issue that we've always faced. And if the data were more transparent, I think, we would have had a lot easier time actually tracking these assets in the first place. With this project and all projects in the past, and that we'll be working on going forward as well.
Cool. And well, that's a great transition to the next comment we had from Smaranda, because you guys did collect that data yourself. Do you suggest that journalists do that, produce their own data sets while covering such a crisis? And if so, what are the challenges of doing that when you're not specifically trained?
The thing is that you actually you have to be trained. You have to have some kind of competences to create some data sets. But if you start with the small ones, for example, I know activists who are not even kind of journalists, they just made it because they are obsessed with this topic, who search for I don't know the word, but Russian military who are kept by Ukrainian military. I don't know how's it called. And they create a data set, and they create a data set of their relatives and so on, just to connect to them, to make them know that their sons, where they are, what happens to them, because it's a huge problem now for Russian, like mothers, wives, and so on, because they don't know where their people are, because military doesn't answer them these questions. And they create a data set. They just use some kind of Google spreadsheets. We consult them on how to protect their data, how to keep it, how to publish it if they decide to publish it, because it's also about some kind of GDPR standards, personal data, and so on and so forth. But yeah, you have to build these competences in the newsroom, because this always makes your work like richer. Mm-hmm. It's not like you have to have a specific team of data people, of DevOps, of, I don't know, developers, and so on and so forth. Sometimes it's like some kind of spreadsheets, some private server, some kind of basic security, and say digital security is enough. Just don't be afraid of it. And there are lots of open courses on data journalism and how to create your own data sets, how to collect your data. Always, I don't know, lots of workshops. Just participate in them. Give it a try. Because I think my favorite thing is when newsrooms collect data and they make some new data set. It's not like we take it from somewhere. I don't speak about now the leaks that OSINT, for example, receives or we receive, because that's other story. But when we create some data, when we know, for example, I recently created a data set of all the railroad crashes in Russia and Belarus, because we know that there are partisan people who try to destroy railroads to stop the tanks going to Ukraine. And you will not take this information from the government, because government is not interested in creating this kind of data set. You will not get a data set of people killed in the war or of civilians killed in the war, because no one is interested in creating this kind of data set. You will never get any kind of data set. Maybe someday, like in a year, you will get a data set from the government of destructed infrastructure. But you are interested in it now. And this is you. You are the only one person. You're the only one person as a journalist or activist, or I don't know, also like human rights activist who is interested in it and who can create it now. And you are not like alone. You can develop a group. You can create collaborations. It's always possible, because lots of people are interested in it now. Actually, a couple of days ago, I was in a conference, and it was a conference for developers, and I presented to them all the different things that we as open source investigators, as journalists and human rights activists, we are interested in, what we want to have now, which instruments we want to have. They are so eager to help us for free. It's not like rocket science, just educate yourself, and for sure newsrooms shall develop their own data sets. That's true.
Thank you very much. Yes, and that's a great transition for the second session that's coming, because the next topic we're going to tackle for an hour is verification. So thank you so much, Claudia, Dada, Karina, Peter. It's been very great to have you here and to get to hear your experiences. We need to leave the floor to the second set of panelists now, but it's been great to hear from you. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, without further ado, I'm gonna leave the floor to Tara. Hey.
Hi, thanks, Marianne. That was super interesting. Now let's move on to the second session. As Marianne mentioned, we're going to be navigating the verification dilemma in Ukraine, where we'll be examining OSINT technologies and how they're applied when reporting on the invasion of Ukraine. Now, it's no secret that this is a war fought with information as much as artillery and traditional combat methods. But before we kick off the panel, let me bring in our guests. Joining us today, we have Owen Mcguire, who's an editor at Bellingcat. Hi, Owen. And we also have Haley Willis from the New York Times. She's a visual investigations reporter. And we also have Francois Destier, a journalist from AFP Digital Verification Team. So thanks all for coming in today to join us for this conversation. Just a reminder to the audience, we have 45 minutes and then we're going to do 10 minutes Q&A. So share your comments and questions in the comment section and we'll get to those. But first of all, I just want to kick off the first question with Owen. Let's start with you. Now, Bellingcat has been at the forefront of investigating and verifying information on Russia even before this invasion began. I just wonder if you could quickly give us some examples of information that you and the Bellingcat team have discovered as a result of OSINT techniques. And, to what extent does this contribute to the detection of certain human rights violations?
Yeah, hi Tara. So
hi.
So like you mentioned, sort of Bellingcat's been doing this for a while now. Even because Bellingcat was founded in 2014, but even before that, Elliot Higgins, our founder, had been kind of obsessively geolocating and chronolocating incidents around the Arab Spring and the likes of Libya and Syria. But I guess we began in 2014, and a few days after, sort of quick introduction, I guess, to what Bellingcat was going to be all about. MH17 was shot down over eastern Ukraine, so Bellingcat became sort of very closely involved in investigating that and using social media, developing these kind of techniques of verification and essentially tracking the Buk missile that shot down MH17 on its journey from Russia to the launch site in eastern Ukraine. Since then, we've done so much. Tracking Russian spies throughout Europe, the poisoning of Alexei Navalny and other Russian opposition politicians, using some of the same techniques we might have developed or used in eastern Ukraine to investigated conflicts in Syria and Yemen as well, and all those kind of human rights violations that went on there. I don't know if I'm going to try and share my screen. I mean, this is all sort of played up into where we've ended up now at the start of the conflict, and we've been working on a couple of things. You mentioned kind of human rights and violations, and what we've kind of focused on since the start of the conflict primarily is civilian harm, so instances of civilian harm in Ukraine. So our main project, and tell me if this works. If it doesn't work, then just let me know. Our main project has been our civilian harm map, where we have used a lot of our sort of volunteers to help find incidents. I mean, there's been such a volume, as I'm sure the other guys on the call will say as well, and essentially locate, okay, where has there been an airstrike? Where has there been an incident that might have hit an apartment building or a school or a hospital, something like that, and sort of brought it all together in this kind of visualization map. So these incidents now are recorded, and anyone who wants to sort of look and you can go back by day, month, week even, and see all these incidents that have happened throughout the conflict. So yeah, using kind of the techniques we've developed over the years has kind of really helped us, I guess, report on the conflict the way that we have, and hopefully provide useful information for the general public, people in Ukraine, and also potentially in the future for justice and accountability projects if such projects get off the ground. So yeah, that's hopefully a broad kind of idea of what we've been doing. So did that work or did that not work?
Yeah, that did work. Thank you. That was fascinating. Thank you, Owen. And I just want to switch over to you, Haley. Now, your team has done some stellar work using OSINT techniques, satellite images, whatnot, have you, to verify information, and covering this conflict. Talk to us about, like, what are some of the challenges and the most challenging investigations you've been working on so far with this war using OSINT? And what kind of data sources, what are your go-to data sources for trying to verify this, and what have you learned?
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, thanks so much for having me. I want to talk a little bit about something that I'm sure both my fellow panelists know the story well, is what happened, of course, in Bucha in Ukraine, right outside of Kiev. We did a story about a few days after footage started coming out of that town, after the Russians had pulled out, showing essentially bodies lying in the streets. We investigated this. The reason I bring it up now, I don't think it was the most challenging story in terms of necessarily like it was very difficult to find the location, or it was it required a lot of advanced technology. But I think what made it challenging is the speed at which the disinformation about that footage came out from the Russian side. And it kind of required us to work quickly in terms of how can we combat that. Our team generally likes to take an approach of, we want to investigate something for months. We want to go into the field as well as use our open source techniques. We want to speak to everyone. But the speed at which we saw Russia basically denying what had happened in Bucha required us to kind of work quickly and think creatively about how we could investigate that. I'm going to also try and share my screen now. Can you all see this? Yes.
I can't see it. Oh yeah, now I can. Now it's working. Yes.
Okay, great. So I'll just play a little bit of this footage. Like I said, I'm sure my fellow panelists and probably many of the people watching have seen this. It is graphic imagery, but the resolution is pretty low, so you won't see anything too graphic. This video in particular was posted by the Ukrainian Armed Forces. And basically what the camera is being pointed at and what you're seeing in the street are bodies lying in the street. obviously the kind of first approach to any footage like this for us open source investigative reporters is, where did this happen? In terms of tools we use for that, we'll talk more about that later, but of course, satellite imagery, street view imagery. In this case, it was not a very difficult video to locate. This is an image from Street View and overlaid an image from the video. This is Jablinska Street in Bucha. So very quickly, we were able to establish where this was, but the question still remained, what exactly had happened? Russia and Russia's supporters came out with a lot of disinformation, like I said, firstly saying that these people were actors, that they were seen moving in the video, and actually Bellingcat did a great piece kind of debunking some of those claims. The later Russian narrative, this is a statement from their official Telegram channel, was that not a single person suffered violent action while Russia was in control of the town, that these people were all killed after Russia pulled out, and they cited the exact date that their units withdrew, March 30th. So, you know, this was a great thing for us to investigate as kind of accountability journalists. Russia saying one thing, they pulled out on the 30th, this didn't happen before then. Can we prove that's not the case? So for that, we also looked to satellite imagery, high resolution satellite imagery. So we looked to Maxar satellite imagery. This is a satellite image from Bucha from March 18th. This is very high resolution imagery, which basically means that it's sub-meter. All you need to know what that is, you can see anything larger than a meter in this type of imagery, which would include, of course, human bodies. Looking closely at the imagery, we saw these, what appear to be dark spots on the street. Here's an image annotating them. The first image is from February, before Russia took control of the town, and then this image is March 19th, which you'll note is 11 days before the Russians said they pulled out. So we saw these bodies on the street for multiple days, so clearly these weren't actors lying there, they were there for a period of multiple weeks. And just as further corroboration, you can then align that satellite imagery with the original video to confirm that what we're seeing here isn't just, for example, like a skid mark on the road or a trash bag. These are in fact the same, unfortunately, human bodies that you see in the video. And we're able to confirm then 100% Russia's story is not true. These people were in the street during the weeks that Russia was in control of the town and before March 30th.
Fascinating.
I will stop there, but we can talk more about it.
Yeah, and I'm just curious, like Owen was talking about, are you also thinking that some of what you're uncovering will be used in war crimes, and you know, and maybe even used in the International Criminal Court at some point? Is that the hope?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we're placed a little bit differently than the folks at Bellingcat in that we can't, as a news organization, directly work with investigators and sort of collecting and archiving this information. But we are, and have always said that our mandate is accountability journalism. And so we put the work out there with the hopes that there will be forms of accountability, and whether that be through the legal route. Obviously, once our reporting is out there, it's great to be seen, to see it be used for those purposes and to kind of document these crimes.
Right. And let's jump to you, Francois. Tell us about AFP and what you're doing in terms of digital verification. And maybe you could just talk us through some of your go-to sources, you know, that have helped verify some information that is on the ground. Yeah.
Okay. Well, as part of the digital verification team at AFP, we're well, it's basically twofold. We're asked a lot by either our reporters on the ground, on the different bureaus around, when there is like a viral video, viral photo that shows something violent or an event, a breaking news event. We would be asked by our bosses to make sure that it happened when it's supposed to. Like, it actually shows what it's supposed to be shown, what it's supposed to show, that it's recent. This is one of the thing we're doing, and we are also helping the reporters on the ground with our OSINT techniques to find information on either to find testimonies, to find people on the ground, to make sure that a claim is founded, and they maybe should go there to verify if there was indeed a breaking news event. This is the type of thing we would be doing on a day-to-day basis. As far as the go-to sources we're using, so we're a pretty big press agency. So I guess one of our biggest strengths is the number. We have a lot of people on the ground, 2 teams rotating on the field, 2 teams of 3, at least 3 person all the time, and going where they feel they can go when it's safe, when it's needed. Then we have the bureaus around the world who will ask like the institutional answer to verify claims, and then there is us, and of course the work also of the entire OSINT community. That it can be pros like Bellingcat, or it can also be, that was really striking during this conflict, the way a lot of people actually came together to verify stuff. So of course, as the press agency, as a very reliable media like Bellingcat and New York Times, you have to double check, but it always gives you like that small lead that you can start working with. And what Ailey showed with this video of the car going in Bucha, at first, I think the first claim that came out was that those were people moving. And it was very, very quickly debunked by just like analysts of images who showed that it was just like a dirt on the windshield, this type of information. Now, to go a little bit, so we would do the same verification, but of course with like readers, you always want to go a little bit deeper. What we did specifically on that one. I'll try to share my screen. So yeah, just like Ailey, I'm sorry, it might be a bit violent because it was a pretty rough event. The thing we could count on at the time was the pictures of our journalists that were there. So the video showed a lot of bodies, and I think the guy circled in red was one of the guy that was supposed to be moving, who was supposed to be an actor. So I'll show you very quickly, but our text journalist, when he went there, you're right on the scene, he actually photographed this guy a couple of times. So he sent us the picture, and we could match it with like a visual cues on the image. And they actually went back the next day to see that the guy was actually at the same spot. I won't show you everything, but it really helped debunk the fact that those were not actors. We had people that saw them, actual journalists. We had testimonies from people in the village that saw them, and we had the images to prove it. So that would be one of the big sources we would use, and then we would see if we could do the same demonstration. What they did with the satellite imagery, we actually, because we're all kind of helping out each other, we could see if we can actually do the same, because a big goal of like the fact-checking verification is that everyone could actually do it to some extent, I guess. And if we ended up at the same conclusion than them, we would go like, okay, the New York Times published this story, we could review the images ourselves, and it shows that those bodies have been in place for a couple of weeks already. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
And Francois, how many people do you have like in Ukraine working for AFP at the moment? If you can reveal that?
In Ukraine itself?
Yes.
It's a very I don't have the exact number because it's always changing a little bit. From what I know, there are 2 teams of 3, but they're moving around a lot. Some people are coming in, some people are going out, and we're actually moved around the bureau to countries nearby to make sure we can get in and out and be as efficient as could be. So there is a specific crisis cell that has been set in Paris. to oversee everything that's related to the conflict. And we're part of that. We're using, like, of course, Russian-speaking people, Ukrainian-speaking people. That's a great help to verify, even like Telegram posts, the writing on some signs in the street that you have to verify. This is really, really an important resource for us.
Right. And I wonder if you could all sort of just share with me what has been your toughest challenge when you are trying to verify information about this war. I don't know, Owen, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I mean, you can answer that question in a couple of ways, I think. So, you talk about our kind of sort of time map when we're looking to verify all these instances of potential civilian harm. The incidents that are in rural areas with very few identifiable features, that's tricky. Trying to, in most instances, if you have, a strike in a city or a town where you do have identifiable features, you can do a geolocation and a chronolocation. The trickier part after that becomes assigning responsibility. And I think, the New York Times has done great work on that so far. But I guess that's a mix of the kind of the traditional OSINT reporting and the on the ground reporting too. There are possibilities to do that through just OSINT, but it takes a lot longer. But for me, I think, and I don't know if Francois and Haley agree with this, but for me, one of the harder things, I guess, is just the sheer volume of information that's coming out. Like, there's so many videos, there's so many incidents, and yeah, that's been one of the tricky things, like trying to get all that, log it, verify it. It's a really big operation. So yeah, that's been, I'd say, probably the biggest challenge, I think.
I would wholeheartedly echo that. I was going to say the same thing. I just think the volume of the content in this conflict is just completely overwhelming. You're in hundreds of Telegram channels. That posts are being sent like 5 posts a minute. Keeping up with that. Also, add on to that this level of, there has been a war in Ukraine in the past. So videos from the Donbass in 2014 are being shared as happening now. Just like the content that people can dig into for this is endless. In some stories we work on, for example, we did a story on Mozambique last year. The problem with that was not enough visuals. We were like calling people constantly trying to find. Here it's the opposite. You have almost so much, wading through that to figure out what's the most relevant, what might be old. It takes a lot of time and it's very difficult.
I second everything. You're verifying a video. There is 5 more in the queue, basically, and a new breaking news event happening. Also, well, maybe it's only related to France, but when we started in 2018-19, everything was mostly on Twitter and Facebook, which were, I guess, more open. It was easier to find the person who posted first. Maybe you could ask some questions. Now everything is going super fast on Telegram. It's super hard to actually find who shot the video, what's the context around it. Was it even posted on a pro-Russian, pro-Ukrainian? So you kind of lost in all that. Also, it's turned into a very hard, you have to be an expert on some stuff. And for example, I'm not an expert in like Russian weaponry, so it takes time to. Because when there is a claim, for example, no, this is a Russian missile. No, this is an Ukrainian missile. I guess a media like Bellingcat is very good at that, because they have been working on that specific thematic for a long time. But when all of a sudden you get asked to know if a missile is actually Russian or Ukrainian, basically you can't answer. You have to go through like military experts in France. It takes a lot of time, and then the time frame starts to become harder. And I guess lastly, some of the images are pretty rough to look at. So one of the hard parts to go through all this verification work is find a way to dissociate or make sure that you, and we're not even on the ground, so we can only imagine what they're going through, the reporters, but find a way to dissociate what you're looking at, what is happening, and still, because it's still useful, so you still want to do it, but it's been rough sometimes to just watch images for a couple of hours. Yeah, that's it.
I can imagine.
I just add to what Francois said as well. There, like an added complication with the weaponry is that both former Soviet Union countries, and there's Tokcha-2 missile, both have them, both have used them in the past. So if you're looking at a strike with a Tokcha missile, and then you're like, okay, who has that? Who was that? Both sides own that weaponry. It's trying to figure it out. It's hard.
And on a very practical note, I wonder, how have you all been coping? I imagine you all aren't fluent in Russian. So are you using Google Translate and like coloring stuff in to figure out what, I mean, is that your go-to source? Or do you have a translator in-house or a friend you ask? How do you kind of, or are you just kind of learning the alphabet as you go and certain words?
I definitely did not learn Russian yet. Well, as I said, for AFP, it could be different for my two other panelists, but we have a cell dedicated to that. So I guess for the very basic claims or information, I would use translation tools. But when I have to dig in, when I have to verify very, very specific signs or claims that are more complicated, I would go through that crisis cell and ask them to translate me word for word, give me the quotes, and then would be a back and forth. That's for AFP.
Definitely, Google Translate is an open source investigator's best friend. Like most journalists have beats, like your beat is Central Africa or your beat is Ukraine, and then you probably speak the language. I always say for visual investigations, our beat is visual evidence, which means we work across a lot of contexts and don't always speak the language. That being said, Google Translate is very good. The best tool is the Google Translate phone app, because if you see like a sign in the background of a video, the app has a camera function that you can literally point it at that sign and it will translate it for you. We're also very lucky on the visual investigations team to have a Ukrainian colleague, Dina Fabin, on staff. And then obviously we can dip further into the entirety of the New York Times and our field reporters, but definitely Google Translate is very helpful.
Yeah, we've got a few Russian and Ukrainian speakers on staff, and also as well we've got, I think as Francois alluded to, like a lot of our focus in the past, just the way that Bellingcat has naturally developed. I think because MH17 happened so soon after Bellingcat was formed, and then the sort of conflict in the Donbass continued, and it attracted a lot of people who were interested in that, in that issue, in that war. We have kind of a lot of people who have knowledge about those places and also speak the languages too. But in saying that, like I don't speak Russian either, so Google Translate is also my best friend. So that's really useful.
And I wonder if all of you could share, like, what are your top go-to tools that you cannot live without when you're covering this war right now? Like, apart from Google Translate, what other satellite imagery tools do you use, or anything else verification-wise?
So maybe I'll answer that slightly differently. I think so. There's tools to use as well, but I think, and this is going to sound really bad, but it's like state of mind. So it's like obsessive attention to detail, the ability to kind of sit and really kind of try and solve a problem or get through a problem. All of that, and there's probably more that I'm not mentioning there, but that's kind of the basis of it. Then beyond that, looking through social media posts, what else, Telegram channels, having your Twitter searches, set up your Telegram, I think Haley mentioned it earlier on, like 500 Telegram channels or something like that, and each of them are going off. We have access to, I know the New York Times has access to Maxar, I'm sure AFP probably does as well, but we've got access to Planet. It's another kind of satellite imagery provider, which is really useful. Have to pay for it, but it's anyone can pay and can access it. Actually, one thing that I find really useful, or I find sort of encouraging people to use, is NASA firms data. So that kind of captures, anomalies around, is there a fire in a particular area? So that can help you define whether there was a strike in a potential area on one day. So if you have a video that says, oh, this strike happened in Kiev at 9 p.m. on the 7th of February or something like that, you can look at NASA firms, and if something shows up there, then you can think, okay, maybe there's something to that claim, and look to use that to further verify it. There's lots more tools, but that's the ones that are coming into my head right now, so I'll let the guys explain a bit more.
So we're both unmuting.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would echo all of that. It's funny hearing that question. I literally wrote down, it's more about the mindset than it is about the tools. So totally agree with that. But in terms of like tools that are useful, definitely satellite imagery. Like mentioned, we work with Planet and Maxar, which are paid service providers, but there are publicly available satellite imagery services that a lot of us use as well. Obviously, Google Earth, satellites.pro, Sentinel Hub. We use a lot of Street View imagery. So for Ukraine, there actually is a lot just on Google and Yandex. There's also Mapillary, which is a Street View website, which is really useful. In terms of searching Telegram, Telegago is basically like a search engine for searching Telegram channels, which is really useful. Reverse image search engines for finding content that might be old. And then honestly, like our number one tool in every investigation we do, not just this one, is just Google Sheets. Like I think people think any of us who do this type of work are very technological and very fancy, but very often like going back to those basic tools, just something where you can easily catalog information as you're finding it, add locations as you're finding it. Nothing is better than a spreadsheet.
Yeah, not much to add. The reverse image search, there is a tool that we a little plugin that we developed at AFP called Invid that helps you do a reverse image search with several search engine, because sometimes Google will give you an answer and Yandex will give you another answer. Always useful. Google Street View. Now I think we went over the most basic and open tools that we could use. Advanced search. Yeah, nothing to add in that, pretty much.
One other thing that actually just came to mind there, which is really useful, is SunCalc. We talk about geolocation and chronolocation, and that's a really useful tool for sort of figuring out exactly when something happened or trying to get closer to when something happened. So yeah, just add that.
Brilliant. And I mean, a lot of you were mentioning Telegram, and I'm just curious, where are you getting most of the videos and images that you're verifying? Like, are people sending them to you, or are you checking different social media sites? And what social media sites and what, what platforms, like WhatsApp, Telegram, Viber? Is it just Facebook? Like, where do you seem to be finding everything?
I guess everyone has his own little techniques for that, for monitoring and finding Telegram groups. Alice said Telegogo. What we do, what works well. What's funny is that you end up having those 500 Telegram pages, and some of them are sharing a lot of disinformation, and all of a sudden they would close, another one would pop off, work has to be done again. What works well for me, I see this information, especially in this conflict. Everything starts on. I'm only speaking about misinformation, disinformation. Everything pretty much starts on Telegram, and then it's zipped through Twitter, and mostly ends up on Facebook. But on those two last social media, where it's much more open, sometimes it's just a screenshot of a Telegram group that you end up finding afterward. You notice a Twitter post that's sharing a video or a screenshot of a Telegram group, and that's how you end up finding it afterward on Telegram. And you see that there are 15 other videos that are also false. This would be one of the tools. Then again, we have our reporters on the ground that are actually involved into crowdsourcing testimonies, and those people that are living in Ukraine would tell them, okay, I'm on a Telegram group. They said that. Do you have any opinion on that? And if they feel like it's important enough, we move up the ladder, and we would have to have access to that Telegram group. But yeah, that's one or two ways that we end up having those 500 Telegram groups in a page.
And Haley, do you want to jump in here, or Owen?
Yeah, I mean, definitely Telegram is, I would say, the bulk of where we get visuals from. I think this is the case with any conflict, but very often, like, videos and photos are shared on private, like very, very private channels before they make it to something like, and I don't even mean like a private Telegram channel that you can get access to. I mean, like, someone sends it to a friend on WhatsApp, they send it to another friend on WhatsApp, then it ends up on Telegram. So I think Telegram has been like the closest we could get in on a mass sense to like where a lot of stuff is being posted. But of course, we also, as journalists, are contacting people directly, so have people sending us videos over WhatsApp. A lot of times what we'll do is, a lot of these Telegram channels are like aggregators, so they just have content sent to them and they post it. So sometimes if we see something really interesting, we'll reach out to whoever runs that Telegram channel, ask if the person who filmed that video would be willing to speak with journalists, or if they have any other footage they'd be willing to share. And then, just like Francois with AFP, we have folks on the ground who are collecting testimony, but especially the field team that we work directly with, so our video field team, basically one of their number one mandates is every single person they talk to, obviously interview, get their story, but also ask any visuals that you have, can you share them with us?
Yeah, Telegram's a really big one for us as well. I mean, it seems to be so much. Yeah, exactly like Haley says. Like, it's probably shared to someone on WhatsApp or privately on Facebook or privately on some other site, and then it makes its way onto Telegram. Like, there are these aggregators there who are just putting out conflict material. But if you look at our civilian harm map, so we've got stuff that's posted, images and videos that's posted on Facebook, on VK. If you contacted basically the Russian Facebook, Twitter, Telegram, TikTok as well, actually. So not so much during the conflict, I've found, but we've been working with the Center for Information Resilience as well, and all our sort of civilian harm data is on their Ukraine-Russia monitor map, which is another. I can share that afterwards if anyone wants to see it, or if the audience wants to see it. But really useful tool. But leading up to the conflict, they were finding, or it seemed to me like they were finding a lot of sort of I guess videos of troop movements within Russia on TikTok. That seemed to be, and I know NBC News did a sort of really good report on that too. So yeah, from what I'm seeing anyway, primarily Telegram, but you are seeing things sort of come up on these other platforms too.
And I'm curious, like, how important is methodology for you all when you're doing an investigation and you're trying to debunk something? Like, are you, I mean, Owen, you're an editor, so I'm sure you're coming at the people who are coming up with the investigation and say, okay, how did this happen? Like, I need to understand that, right? Is that something that you're mindful of when you're editing? Like,
yeah, but then I mean, I guess that's kind of baked into the DNA of Bellingcat. We're all about kind of showing the method, or that's what we try to be about. So if you can't explain it to me, who's not an investigator in the same way that the people who work for Bellingcat are, and they have that kind of obsession and that kind of ability to sit down at a computer screen for like 12, 13 hours at a time or something like that. But yeah, we'll always try to be open with that and explain the methodology so people can retrace it, just to be fully transparent. That usually leads to very long articles, but I think that's useful in terms of providing, I guess, a public service or something in the public interest. So yeah, that's always something that we'll try and be sort of open about. And I know, like, yeah, AFP and the New York Times definitely, they do it in a different style from Bellingcat, but it's the same thing. Like the video that Haley showed earlier on, that was just a really neat way of just being completely transparent about, okay, here's this video footage and here's this satellite imagery, and here it is beside each other, so see for yourself, basically. And that the methodology is clear, and the story is super clear as well.
I don't know if anyone wanted to add it to that. Go ahead.
No, yeah, it's pretty much the same. We're trying to explain step by step what we did for the investigation as much as we can. Hopefully, we have open source, or at least like identifiable sources with like on comments, and not someone said that we cannot identify. Sometimes it's not the case, but we try to avoid that. And the way I see it, the way we see it at AFP is the person who is reading, in the best case scenario, should be able to redo the exercise and arrive to the same conclusion. It's the way we imagine things. That way we are actually, even the more doubtful readers are gonna, at least at the end, be like, okay, I could do it, and I reached the same conclusion as them. That's the way we do it. That's the way we try to do it, at least at AFP. It makes
Haley,
I do
sorry,
agree
go
that
ahead.
sometimes, I do agree that sometimes it makes for a reading that's less artistic than the usual AFP report, AP report, or a New York Times report, but it still is necessary.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, definitely we have a very different writing style from some of our other colleagues at the Times. I agree with everything that was said. I would also just say, in terms of methodology and transparency, something that we're very careful of, and I know my fellow panelists are, is also being very transparent about what you don't know. In conflict, it's practically impossible to know everything. Like, there's so many facets to what's going on. So in the example I showed earlier, for example, Bucha, like, all that satellite imagery analysis did is it showed us that those people had been on the street for weeks, and that it was while Russia was in control of the town. That told us nothing about how those people were killed. We do not know that yet. It's something that we've continued to investigate. That takes a lot more work, right? Like, maybe they were shot by a Russian sniper. Maybe they were shot up close by a Russian soldier. Maybe they were killed as a result of Ukrainian shelling into Russian forces, and we were very clear about that when we published. This is what we don't know yet from this, but what we do know is that Russia's statement that none of these people were killed while they were there is false.
Yeah, I think that brings up a really interesting point, because I just see a lot of headlines, particularly when I was recently in the United States on the news, and very, I don't know, certain very divisive media saying, "Oh, Russia's got this," or "Ukraine's got this," and back and forth saying, "No, this one's winning, this one's winning." It's like, we don't know. We're not on the ground. I mean, we can talk to analysts, we could talk to people who are in and out of Ukraine, but it feels a bit like, I don't know, is that misinforming people? Some of these news organizations that are saying, yeah, Russia's definitely winning, or Ukraine is definitely winning. I don't know if any of you have any thoughts. It's not really OSINT related, but it's just something to be mindful of, right? We have to check our biases, even if we really personally do want Ukraine to win. I wonder how that works with your investigations and how you check your biases.
Yeah, I would say we're very careful about, and actually, we don't make sweeping statements like that on the visual investigations team for the exact reason that you're stating. But you do have to be conscious of biases, and also just like focusing on the open source part of it, like the biases of the internet and like where the footage is coming from, like, because this war is happening in Ukraine, a lot of the footage that's being uploaded is being uploaded by Ukrainians. And there's nothing wrong with this, but the fact of the matter is that a Ukrainian is probably more likely to upload a video of a Russian convoy that's been destroyed than of a Ukrainian convoy that's been destroyed. So are we really getting an accurate representation of who's winning or losing based on open source information? Probably not, which is why, we use it to verify very specific things as opposed to like try and see trends of the entire war.
Yeah, this part of the analysis we would leave to the crisis cell, and they would reach out to like 15, 20 different war experts that would say, okay, they lost this part of Ukraine, and so it means that those troops are moving on, and then the infographics desk would do something. That's something that we would use as background in our stories, but we cannot verify that type of claim, and you have to accept that too. That a lot of disinformation, misinformation on claims that you are unsure of, you just can't. You make sure that you pick claims that you can actually go through with.
Yeah, I fully agree with the guys. It's I mean, open source can let you know some things, but there's also maybe lots of known unknowns and unknown unknowns. So yeah, like both Francois and Haley say, it's you may know that a strike happened somewhere. You may know when it happened, but the question about who's responsible for that's a different question altogether. And I mean, from talking from Bellingcat's perspective, it is possible to, in some circumstances, it may be possible to attribute particular attacks, but it takes a lot of investigation, a lot of digging, a long time. It's not something that, unless there's like a really clear, obvious a person, you can say, okay, that was a person standing with a gun. He had a Russian army patch or a Ukrainian army patch on his shoulder. You can then attribute that, but a lot of the time it takes a lot of investigation, like a missile strike, for example. Like, okay, the directionality of that strike, where did it come from? Okay, who was what troops were in this area around that time? You can begin to narrow things down, and that can inform your investigation. But that's not something that's very easy to do. So yeah, sticking with what you know and what you can say, and what you comparing that to public statements to disprove what in the case of Bucha, what Russia was saying, that open source can be very useful there. But yeah, those broader things, much harder question, and yeah, best left for other types of reporting, I think.
Perfect. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was thinking, yeah, as I said, or a combination of things. And what Haley said about Bucha and the satellite imagery analysis, they said this could be done in a couple of days. Lucky for us, because we had the imagery and everything. But as she said, who did that? Who did the entire thing? If you wanted to do it with OSINT, you would not reach it ever, because you would need the footage. And if you wanted to go to the bottom of it, and I'm pretty sure people are actually trying right now, but they're still trying. It's been 2 months, and you have to be on the ground for that. At some point, as a journalist, you have to keep it simple and say, okay, I need to be there. If I want to get to the bottom of it, I need to be there, to talk to people, to have access to information. There is limits to things you can do with OSINT too.
And I'm just going to bring in a question from one of the people in our audience. Andrew Salerno Garthwaite says, if a lot of visual investigation is debunking and countering disinformation, do you ever feel like the direction for your work is dictated by bad actors?
Maybe, but isn't journalism a lot of that as well? So we actually made a conscious decision at the start of the conflict. It was like, okay, where can we be useful? Where's the kind of gap in the space for us? And we felt that civilian harm was the place. And we also felt like, what is disinformation when people are dying as well? So it's like, okay, what is important for us to get to? So that's why we decided to sort of focus on those incidents of civilian harm. But in saying that, there's also those instances where there's potentially disinformation. So Bucha was one, the strike in Kramatorsk was another, where we thought, okay, let's try and look at that, and let's compare what the open source, information tells us, that the material tells us, compared to the statements made by, be that the Ukrainians or the Russians.
Yeah, I think I'm not so sure if dictated is the right word, but I mean, certainly, like I said before, we position ourselves as accountability journalists, and what comes out of that is like prioritizing where there is someone in power that is putting out a certain narrative, and that narrative may or may not be correct. So that is how we prioritize a lot of our work. But I will say, like, at least in VI, in this conflict in particular, we have focused more on the issue of debunking and disinformation, but it's actually not really our priority, like fact checking. We usually do kind of larger scale things. And we also, I think, in this question of what do we focus on, what do we not, similarly as Bellingcat, we obviously prioritize issues where there's civilian harm, where there's potential war crimes. Obviously, like the question is suggesting, where Russia or another bad actor might be spreading false information. But an example of the opposite is, early on in the war, we did a piece on all of these videos that have been coming out of Ukrainian civilians confronting Russian soldiers. They weren't being used in any sort of disinformation sense. They weren't really showing anything in terms of a war crime or the progression of the war. But especially for my Ukrainian colleagues, they saw this as really important context. And so we verified those videos, where were they taken, and did a small kind of write-up on what they showed. And that was a decision driven not by, disinformation. So I think it goes both ways.
And Francois, any thoughts on that? Or
we have basically it's day-to-day discussion in the newsroom. Should we, when you have those hundreds of video coming at you, you have to decide whether it's worth it. You also have a gut feeling. Okay, this is disinformation, but is it worth it that I actually work a couple of days, a couple of hours, several days on that? So we take into account the time that it takes. We take into account the harm that can be done, even though that's subjective. But as again, civilian harm, massive disinformation theory. We take into account the reach of the post, the videos. Did it touch only 5-10 people, or was it very, very widespread? Is it something that, like the Russian MOD said or the Ukrainian MOD said, or is it something that a couple of citizens in Kiev said? These are all metrics, parameters that you take into account before diving into a story to know beforehand if it's worth it or not. And yeah, that's what I can add.
Yeah, we all have limited resources, so I'm sure it's difficult to decide, okay, what am I actually going to focus on? We've got another question from someone from the audience, Amandra. Currently, these teams are exposed to a lot of sensitive content. Do editors support them in any way to prevent the impact of this?
Great question.
That's a good question. Yeah, yeah, a lot of traumatic imagery, a lot of really graphic imagery. Yeah, we work with the Dart Center for trauma, and that's a really useful resource. And yeah, I guess also as an editor, like you've kind of got to be wary of the people you're working, not wary of the people you're working with, but wary of the content that they're viewing and the impact it's having on them as well, and thinking when's right to have a conversation with them. So yes, that is, and not just in this conflict, that goes for all types of open source sort of work as well, because a lot of the times it's very heavy subject matter. I mean, I'm just thinking in the last year, like the stuff we've done, the Tigray conflict as well, it's another one that's, you know, it's difficult from a different perspective, I think, in terms of how people engage with it, because there's less content, but they really drill down into very specific issues because there's less content, or they may really drill down into a really specific graphic video because, you know, that's the only one there is, and that the impact that has is different from, you know, lots of graphic, just so much overwhelming you type thing. So yes, to answer the question simply is yes, and yeah, we do have sort of practices and policies in place to helpfully sort of deal with that, or hopefully deal with that.
I will add on to the praise for the Dart Center. They're an amazing resource. We've done several sessions with them since the start of the conflict. And I would just say, I think a lot of times, I come from a human rights background where we had a lot more time to kind of focus on this. In journalism, of course, the speed of work makes it difficult to kind of step back. And I think that just requires then having really open conversations between reporters and editors, and like setting aside time to kind of like think about how you're being impacted and also kind of approach the work with a certain mindset. I think in terms of like the issue of resiliency and how the sensitive content affects people, I think many people who do this work struggle with feeling bad about it because we have a sense of guilt. Like, I'm certainly not Ukrainian and suffering from these crimes, and I'm also not usually in the field, so I'm not even seeing it directly. Why am I feeling so bad? You know, I should just suck it up. And I think breaking out of that guilt mindset and seeing it more as like working towards sustainability for your work. You know, a lot of people who report on war burn out in 2 years, and that doesn't help anyone. That certainly doesn't help the communities you're covering. And so like practicing techniques to maintain your mental health is better for the work in the long term. And I think editors encouraging that mindset in their journalists is always going to be a good thing.
For me, we also had a couple of conversation, a training. They also set that up for like the photo editors, of course, because those are not working on disinformation, but on real images sent by our teams of reporters. And yeah, as Ailey said, it's a struggle. You have to feel okay about saying no also sometimes, and be like, okay, this is too much for a day. What else? hopefully the editors are actually not putting pressure on you to like keep focusing on those images. But I do feel like it helps a lot when you're actually feeling useful. Like you feel like what you're doing, you're getting somewhere, and this is something that's going to be useful for as a story, as something to be told. This helps. And also, I guess everyone has his own little techniques. But for example, on the Bucha thing, I would focus on other visual cues than the violent imagery, because you can, let's say you have to geolocate an image of a violent scene. There is a lot of thing on the screen that you can focus on without looking at the blood or the bodies, and that is actually much more useful than the violence. So it's little tricks. I guess everyone has some.
Marvelous. Well, on that note, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. But I really appreciate all of you coming on and sharing your perspective on how you're using OSINT in this war. And it's just been super interesting. So thank you again. Once again, we're going to be turning this into a podcast. So that will be in the Conversations with Data newsletter. But yeah, thanks everyone for coming on. It's been really interesting.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Tad.
It was very interesting.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye. And with that, I'm going to bring Marianne into this conversation.
Yay. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, let's move on to our third session. Let me just say that it's been incredible to hear all of those experiences, and I hope everyone enjoys it as much as we do. And thanks God we are making things out of this, so it's not just a one-time thing. We're moving on to this third session where we will be talking about innovation in the war zone. This last part is dedicated to showcasing compelling data coverage of the conflict and learning from the experience of two world-known teams, right?
Yes. And of course, it's no secret that audiences are growing tired of war coverage. You know, we've seen this in recent years with other conflicts like in Syria, Yemen, elsewhere. But it is essentially critical, you know, that us journalists try to cover it, even if this means we get low engagement on stories or low traffic, because it's still important. So I guess the question is, how can journalists harness this moment and try and create more innovative storytelling for covering this war and engaging with their audiences?
Sure. And so joining us to discuss this is, first of all, Gianluca Mezzofiore, investigative producer at CNN in London. And we also have Sam Joyner, who is the Financial Times Visual Stories editor. Hi to you both. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know you're both very busy, so it's great to have you and try to keep very sharp on time. Before we get started, just a reminder that we have a Q&A session at the end. So everyone watching, don't hesitate to comment and to ask your question along the way, and we'll get to them later on. Tara, do you want to kick off things with
Sure.
the first question?
Yeah, Gianluca, I'm going to start with you. CNN has long had a foothold in war reporting, with reporters embedded with the military or out on their own in the field finding stories. You know, Christian Amanpour, Clarissa Ward, the list goes on. How does that perspective and strong track record of conflict reporting sort of impact the stories that you deliver digitally and what you're focusing on as an investigator, investigative journalist?
Hi, thank you, Tara, for the question, and thanks to everyone for this opportunity. So, as you said, CNN has a long track record of war reporting, and we, as sort of digital investigators, stand on the shoulder of giants. All the great war reporting has been done until now by CNN reporters that have been covering wars for decades. I think the Russia-Ukrainian war marked a shift in the war coverage, and this has been noted by a lot of experts and by internally at CNN as well. And with that, I mean that obviously CNN mission is to go there. It's our motto. It's in our DNA. And the Ukraine war is no exception. We had a lot of teams there on the ground since the beginning of the war, even before the start of the war. And there was a team even in Russia, the border with Ukraine, when the rockets were being fired on the February 24th, for example. But with this war, the magnitude of videos and the images available on open source is absolutely like never seen before. There's no comparison to Syria, for example. A lot of people, rightly so, asked why we've seen that so much coverage and so much open source coverage of the war in Ukraine, and as opposed to what happened with Syria. But the reality is, we haven't seen that many videos before during a war, and I'm talking of several platforms altogether. Where we've seen, particularly before the war started, a lot of TikTok videos, for example, of Russia massing troops at the border with Ukraine or in Belarus. And our job as sort of open source investigators started way before the war in trying to sort of geolocate and verify those videos to show the movement of troops and to sort of also show that Russia was being serious in this, and even doing other efforts, like, for example, debunking false flag operations that Russia was using, as an excuse to start a war. There was those videos of sabotage or missiles being fired in the separatist republics. And when, after the war started, we, as sort of the open source investigations team, worked like nonstop, like 24/7, to basically geolocate and verify those videos, not only for our coverage, but also crucially for our correspondents on the ground. So we had a lot of people who were in different cities of Ukraine when the war started, several correspondents, and the kind of intelligence that we were getting from open source was unimaginable, in other words. And that like really marked a big shift in the way we as CNN covered this war. Before Ukraine, open source and sort of the social discovery work was sort of aside to the key focus of our coverage, while with Ukraine it became the center and fold of every story we've been doing since then. And that sort of day-to-day coverage allowed also us as investigators to work on more in-depth projects as well. It was often a starting point for medium or long-term investigations that open source core, digital core, but then obviously expanded to on-the-ground coverage because of the CNN capacity to have people in every part of the country. So I think to sum it up, I think Ukraine, for at least for CNN, but I've seen also for other broadcasters, it really changed the attitude of heritage media in covering the war. And you might say that for open source people, open source OSINT investigators, this is nothing new, in the sense that as Bellingcat Bellingcat people were rightly saying, they've been all over this at least since Syria, since 2016. But the difference now is become mainstream, and now every news organization have to deal with open source and this kind of coverage.
Yeah, and so by the way, I mean, your team has done incredible work using geolocalization techniques to verify information, as well as satellite imagery and graphics to help tell stories visually. Could you show us and talk us through an example of innovative data storytelling on the Russia-Ukraine war that you've done? Just how it came about and the sort of challenges that you faced while making it.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to share my screen. Hang on just a sec. Right. I think I need to change the preferences. The system, just a second.
You can also share a link with me and I can put it on screen if you want.
Actually, maybe that's easier. Sorry.
That's all right.
Oh yeah, we need to restart Chrome, so I'd rather actually send you the link, if you don't mind.
Sure. There we go.
Right. So this story that we published last month this story, you were wondering, you were asking how it came about, and as I said, like very often the starting point is just our sort of daily open source work. So at the very beginning of the war, the first 2 days, February 24th and February 25th, we were seeing like a lot of rockets attacks in Kharkiv, in residential areas of Kharkiv, and that unfortunately has been going on since then, pretty much. We started sort of verifying and geolocating those videos, and we sort of were wondering, after pinpointing the location of these videos on Google Earth, we were sort of seeing a pattern that kind of appeared to show, as you can see from this satellite image, for example, that appeared to show sort of a line. And we were getting a lot of videos from the ground showing these rockets stuck on the pavement, for example, and the weapons expert were pointing out the fact that these were merch rockets. And more importantly, a lot of these attacks appear to show that cluster munition bombings, which are not only incredibly lethal and but also have serious consequences for the future, because as it happened in Lebanon, for example, people are still discovering these submunitions years later, and they could explode and cause incredible consequences. And so after sort of geolocating these incidents, we sort of went back and asked the question, who was launching these attacks? Why were they targeting residential areas in Kharkiv? What was the strategy behind it? Was there a particular unit in the Russian army that was doing that? This is like security footage, CCTV footage showing people fleeing from a park while this cluster submunition explode all around them. And these videos were, particularly appalling. So what we did in collaboration with the Center for Information Resilience, if you can just stop there, after identifying the location impacted by the merch rockets and identifying the merch rockets themselves, and then there were other instances of submunitions being uncovered in the areas, we sort of tried to draw a trajectory from the sort of point of attacks, and was obviously based on the known range area of the merch rockets, which is 70-90 miles. And based on that, and on the direction of the rockets, we drew a line going all the way up, which converged in an area south of Belgorod, Russia. So it was actually showing that the attacks were starting from Russia. So the Russian units didn't even need to be in Ukraine to launch these attacks. And from that, we were lucky enough to have a satellite image dated from the same day, February 27th, showing the actual moment the Smerch rocket was fired toward Kharkiv. And you can even see the smoke plume and the burn marks, the double burn marks that are typical of the Smerch rockets. And this was obviously a concerted effort, with us and the Center for Information Resilience. There were other open source people. I need to say that made the same findings online. So as often happens with open source, that's not just one individual doing that, but it's like a concerted effort. And then from that, we sort of sent a team on the ground that visited the same location, spoke to eyewitnesses. So this speaks again to the sort of combining the open source digital investigation job to traditional on the ground reporting that CNN is renowned for. This is an example of like graphics. We're later speaking about production that we made the submunitions, cluster submunitions, and the casualty records, and then afterwards we managed to make a connection between this unit that was launching these attacks and the general that signed off on these cluster munition Smerch attacks, and the same general used the same strategy in Aleppo, Syria, and as you can see from these images, General Zhirav. So it kind of speaks to the same strategy. Horrible strategy of targeting civilian infrastructure with the idea of sort of demoralizing the population and flattening cities that we've seen in Syria, in Aleppo, Syria, and here in Ukraine.
And so to come back to this incredible graphic where you managed to cross-reference information here on the rockets, do you have specific tools at hand to make this happen? To track the trajectory of something, or to just take a map and try to draw something?
It was all made on Google Earth, actually. So we have like a Google Earth with all the sort of location pinpointed, and then with the Center of Information Resilience, we sort of managed to like draw a line just on Google Earth, showing just exposing the satellite image where the attacks was launched. So yeah, nothing too fancy for this.
Yeah, pretty incredible. Okay, thank you very much for sharing that with us.
And Sam, I wonder, coming from the Financial Times, you've worked on several rich, immersive pieces looking at this conflict. Could you just show us some examples that sort of best depict, your coverage and innovation, when focusing on this war?
Yeah, of course. First, thank you for having me. It's been a good day so far. I've really enjoyed the talks I've listened to. I think I'd start by saying, I'll just start sharing my screen now, but I think I would start by saying that the rolling nature of the conflict just doesn't immediately lend itself to the type of visual journalism that we want to produce. We spend a minimum of a kind of week to 2 weeks turning things around, and often it can be significantly longer than that. So my initial challenge was to work out how we were going to contribute to the Financial Times coverage of it, because the wider visual and data team instantly goes to work. We got somebody like Steve Bernard who springs up a load of maps, and we kind of base our reporting on those immediate day-to-day sort of ways of telling a war and kind of visually communicating what's happening. And my challenge was to think about how we could kind of tap into it and kind of tell a bigger story within the rolling conflict. And initially that was quite difficult. And then I think the longer the war kind of went on, I started listening to people talk about this second phase and the fact that Putin's initial plan had failed. And that kind of gave us an opportunity to go, right, okay, so let's just assess what we called phase one of the war. And I think we had to do it very quickly at that point. We set ourselves a challenge of telling the story of part one of the war in 2 weeks from scratch. So I'll just share this story now. So this was the story we wanted to tell, how Russia's mistakes in Ukrainian resistance had altered Putin's war. And we did this about a month or 3 weeks into the conflict, when it became clear that the war had kind of stalled, and Putin's approach and attempt to take Kyiv in that lightning assault had stalled. And we kind of went through from there, and we based the whole thing on a map. And we I think still at this point, readers kind of understanding of Ukraine as a nation in terms of where things were, like their geographic sort of understanding of it wasn't great, and was kind of developing as the conflict unfolded. So we wanted to kind of base this on top of Ukraine and show you from there what this looked like. So we kind of take readers in, we show the territorial gains made by the Russians, we show that they were targeting these densely populated areas, and then we kind of whiz you in and take you around the country to show you the key urban areas that they were targeting at the beginning. And then we did a lot of the kind of OSINT work that you've been hearing about today. So we kind of worked out where these key locations were, and we found the footage that best supported the argument that or the narrative that we were taking from this first part of the war, which was that Ukrainian resistance and Russia's mistakes had completely changed the course of the war, and it wasn't the war that many thought would unfold. And that involved interviews with military analysts and former four-star NATO generals, as well as people on the ground, to kind of understand what was happening. This video here is Russian soldiers marching back out of Sumy after abandoning their equipment on the way back to Russia. And it involved doing other things. I'll come to it shortly, but we also managed to geolocate, I think this is the first time this has been done, but the 64-kilometer convoy that snaked its way out from Kyiv that completely snarled up. And that kind of became a real symbolism of the hubris that kind of had blighted Putin's approach to this war, and the fact that they believed that they could take Kyiv in a matter of days. I just kind of whiz you through. So these are the major transport routes that were followed. We talked about the Ukrainians' approach, the way that they'd kind of been preparing for this. We spoke to some really interesting people that said that right back to the annexation of Crimea, Ukraine had been preparing for a full invasion. They hadn't been, I think outside of Ukraine, people had thought that they would be thinking about how they countered what was happening in the Donbass, but actually we spoke to people who were there training the Ukrainian military and said US experts basically and kind of generals saying this is what they've been preparing for. The tactics that we're seeing now have been in place for a long time. And that's the kind of key thing that we try to do as a team is kind of explain. We take a big topic like the war in Ukraine, find an angle, and then go after it as quickly as we can to kind of explain what's happening. I'll just drive you through this a little bit further. Another thing we did, which was quite nice, was visualize some of the key weapon ranges. So the NLAWs and javelins have played a huge role in this war. But what does 800 meters actually look like when we're talking about that on the ground? Like it's quite hard to understand that contextually. And then what does 4 kilometers look like? And we kind of used these visual techniques to kind of show readers stuff that they'd been reading about but potentially hadn't seen, and how this was playing out within the war. So that's one story that we told, which I think was quite a nice example. I'll quickly show you, if I've got time, another example, which I think is quite good too. Give me 2 seconds. And this story, I think this story is important because it's something that we started to look at, and I think the Financial Times have done well at reporting on, is the second order impacts of the conflict. So the ramifications of a war on this scale are enormous, and those sort of narratives started to kind of be teased out, and I think of increasing significance, and telling those stories became vital. The kind of key one that we've been reporting on or looking at is the implications for the global food security. The war's had a major impact on that. I didn't know that Ukraine was the breadbasket of Europe in the way that it was, and wars have a way of revealing these kind of key sort of infrastructure or kind of ways that the world are interconnected. And I think that you don't really realize that until something like this unfolds. Often these kind of supply chain routes just work quite seamlessly. And I think both COVID and the war in Ukraine have exposed how physically connected we really are. So we wanted to dive into the food crisis and tell the story of basically how Russia was systematically targeting Ukrainian food supplies, but also what the wider ramifications were for the rest of the world in terms of Ukraine struggling to farm, in terms of Ukraine struggling to distribute, and then what those impacts would be. So this one, we actually really wanted to do some reporting on the ground. We had somebody in Kyiv who went and spoke to farmers directly affected, and we sent a photographer with John Reed, who was that reporter, and we kind of showed really what was going on there. And I think it really helps when you combine war photography and frontline reporting in this data-driven analysis. It kind of brings to life these stories in a way that hits home that what we're telling you is kind of cuts through any kind of like disinformation and that kind of feeling that what you're saying might not be accurate. And there is so much disinformation on a conflict like this, it really helps. So we kind of took readers through, we showed the amount of agricultural production that comes from Ukraine, so significant compared to the rest of the world. We showed where it goes. So India, for example, 77% of the domestic supply of sunflower oil comes from Ukraine, or came from Ukraine in 2019. We kind of used this scrolly map to do that. And then later in the piece, these are all photographs taken exclusively for us, showing the damage that was done. These are dead chickens on a farm just outside Makarev. And then we take you into the struggles to distribute. So we know that Russia has been targeting the south, coming out of Crimea. And then we show you basically how exports by sea have been impossible since the invasion. This is the normal routes. And then we show you the normal railway routes, which was a plan B for how you would export. And this bit I didn't know. This is fascinating. So, and this is when I kind of realized this would become a great visual story. So the Ukrainian railway lines and Russian railway lines use a very different track width to Europe. So you have to unload and reload all of this. So the sort of complexities around trying to export this vast amount of food to the rest of the world. And the reason this is going to be a second order impact that we feel for until the war is over, and then in the time periods that follow, because there's so much to fix in Ukraine, is going to be really, really significant. It's called a bogey exchange, and this is the system of trying to change the railway tracks, and it's not a quick one. So this was a nice way of tapping into those second order stories that weren't the frontline ones, and that's another way that we can have a big impact, I think, as a visual storytelling team.
Wow, amazing. Thank you very much for sharing those examples. The next question that we have for you is actually for both of you, Sam and Gianluca. A bit of a broad question, I'm afraid. That is, how on earth do you innovate while covering such sensitive topics such as war and conflicts? Like, does the subject makes it tougher to try new things, or in the contrary, the topic makes you want to innovate and do new things? Who wants to go first? Yeah.
You gonna go first? Or...
No, you go first. You go first.
Yeah, I mean, as Sam rightly said, the like sort of rolling nature of the conflict actually made it quite hard, to try and innovate, because we like I was used to work on long-term projects. Like last year, we published a lot of investigations on Ethiopia and the Tigray conflict, and we work in like a 1 month, sometimes even 2 months long investigation with deployment on the ground and high production. And by nature, like with the Ukraine war, you sort of the time frame is like compressed. And one example I can actually give you right now, if I can finally share my screen, is the story. Just a second. The story we published on the Mariupol maternity hospital attack. So for this story, we sort of used a 3D model of the area of the hospital, and we worked with a 3D visual editor who was a forensic architecture, and we sort of the time frame for this investigation was 1 week. So we worked for like flat out day and night to sort of show not only that the attack happened on a civilian infrastructure and that it was operating at the moment, unlike what the Russian was saying. But what we were trying to show was also a sort of time frame of this information on the Russian side, and the sort of target campaign to Mariana, the pregnant woman, that the Russian embassies sort of launched against her. So this is the 3D model. I hope it's working. I don't know why it's now there's an issue with
maybe the screen share is making it
yeah, but it's oh yeah, as you can see the 3D model, and there is sort of a timeline of the hospital, the way it was operating before the attack, and several pictures. And this is what I was talking about, sort of showing the sort of smear and disinformation campaign on the Russian side before the attack was launched on the hospital. And we use a lot of satellite images. We have a very good relationship with Maxar and other satellite companies. Again, like this is our reconstruction showing the car. There were several cars parked on the facility, and the first reports of the attack, and it's a sort of example of what you can achieve in a week. This is the crater, and we spoke to several weapons experts that already at the time were saying that it was launched from the air. So I like what the Russians were saying, and Mariana herself said to the BBC when they interviewed her. So there was no doubt it was an airstrike, and that it was with a 500 kilo explosive bomb. So it's challenging, because obviously we had to sort of work flat out for a week, and the 3D modeler probably hates us right now, because to kind of answer our incredible requests, and there was also a TV package associated with it. But I think it's quite a good example of what you can achieve in such a sort of compressed time frame.
Can you remind us how many people worked on this for a week?
So you'll see. It's the credits at the bottom. A lot of people.
To reassure everyone.
It was us reporting. Okay. Sarah Grace is exceptional lead designer, and then we're digital design and graphics people, digital development people, and as I said, there was also digital video and a TV package as well. And the 3D model was made by Tom James, so it was like made an incredible effort that week with a lot of like personal sacrifice as well to sort of deliver this piece.
Cool, thank you very much, Gianluca. And so Sam, what's your view on this? How?
I think Gianluca's answer is spot on, that it's trying to apply visual storytelling techniques to what is the really sort of live and current story. And I think for us as a visual storytelling team, as a new team, we've kind of been in existence for less than a year. It was a great opportunity to apply those things to what is the biggest story of the moment. And I think often visual storytelling teams are great at telling kind of the story you're not expecting to read. But when there's something of this magnitude, you're suddenly thrust into the limelight, and you're able to use visuals to tell stories in ways that are the biggest stories. And the story I just showed you on Russia's mistakes was one of the best read pieces we published as an organization so far this year. Another sort of much simpler, I'm just going to share my screen again. We are a visual team, so or this is a visual part of the presentation, so I hope you don't mind. But a much simpler sort of innovation which we introduced, which was quite nice, was the hide sensitive content toggle. So I don't know if you can see down here, we've got this little toggle, and it's as simple as that. And it replaced all of the videos with still images. So we're quite conscious that some readers would find these images distressing. And as you scroll through a story, you don't know what you're going to see. And it was something that we got a lot of really good feedback on. It was a late decision. We thought, why don't we introduce this and see how it works? And it's something we're using again for another story. And I think it's a good example of kind of innovating in a small way that can have a big impact on readers. And then another thing I wanted to show you just very quickly, this is something we're publishing. We haven't published yet, so this is very much a sneak peek of something that we're working on. So let me show you this quickly. This is a story we're working on where we managed to fly a drone I won't even tell you the town. If you work it out, Gianluca will know because he'll be able to get it. But for everybody else, I'm going to keep it secret because we're going to publish this at some point soon. But we managed to fly a drone through one of the cities or one of the towns. Trying to do something like that within a war zone is quite complex, and those challenges and the opportunity to innovate in a live, active area is quite complex. And that's something that we wanted to do and kind of take.
How do you fly a drone onto a war zone?
It's an area. I'll show you this one as well because it's quite powerful. It's not an active war zone now, so it's an area that is quite safe, and the military have marked it as safe. But it's still so it was fine. I thought everybody would say no, but I kept asking, and it kept going through other and nobody said no. But this is quite a nice video as well that shows. Basically takes you right inside a building that we want to talk about within the story, and these figures are untouched. This is a cultural center, and it kind of takes you this kind of immersive storytelling is something that you can do with something that feels very live to help take readers into a conflict. And I think this is a nice opportunity to situate readers and really show them it and kind of bring something to life for them where they might be tired of it, of the war reporting, but they won't be tired of seeing things like this. And I think that's quite a nice way of making things feel fresh and feel new.
Oh, thank you very much.
I feel like you guys kind of answered the next question I was going to ask, which was like, what kind of new innovative storytelling and technology are you using? It sounds like there's 3D modeling, 3D modelers you're working with, and then also, like using drones. I wonder what other visuals aids you're using, or what other technology you're trying to bring in to sort of humanize the story and deal with this apathy that maybe we're seeing.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's like a device or I don't know if it actually helps humanize the story that much. But I would say one thing that is at least I think is unprecedented on the Ukraine war is the use of sort of satellite imagery to tell a story, and I think it's really telling that a lot of these satellite companies are now working together with like journalists, to sort of task the satellites almost on a daily basis to sort of deliver these incredible images. And one example, I think that is a great example in itself, and it's very telling, is the sort of the satellite imagery of the Mariupol theater with the war child. I think that kind of was impressed in everyone's memory because it's such a like compelling image, and it tells a story by itself. And then AP did that amazing visual investigation. I can maybe show you actually, just a sec. Of the Mariupol theater, and they also flew a drone on the I don't know how they did it, to be honest with you, but this is pretty amazing. And cell phone images and the way they sort of just exposed the video, the mobile videos is also really, really compelling. The map where people were sheltering, and I think there's also satellite image. Yeah, there you go, satellite image with children written in Cyrillic. So I think like the way they combined eyewitness testimonies, the map of the theater, satellite imagery, and the drone videos, like this is one of the best examples I've seen of like sort of innovating the storytelling of the war, and making it more accessible to everyone, because everyone can see those images and relate to it, relate to how horrible this attack was.
Yeah, I think satellite imagery has played a huge role. I also think that the role that citizen journalism has played in terms of making information publicly available is enormous. I don't know if we've seen something explode in that way, like from people like Rob Lee, who's a war studies student at King's University, has exploded because he's taking content from Telegram or TikTok and repurposing it basically to a sort of more mainstream audience. And the amount of content that is being filmed by the public within Ukraine, everybody's kind of documenting these crimes, and journalists are then repackaging and repurposing them, but we're not filming them. I mean, it's not us on the ground, and the rise of that sort of citizen journalism has been transformative for the stories that we can tell, but also for the way that this war has been kind of reported on and covered. But I also think there is a kind of responsibility with that, because what we see coming out of Ukraine isn't necessarily the exact narrative, and I think I know you touched, Marianne, earlier on, like the role of the criminal courts in kind of reporting on what happened in Ukraine, and the way properly gathering this evidence and going through it will be really vital. But it feels like in part the public have been able to form an opinion much earlier than they have in, say, the Rwanda conflict, where this stuff doesn't come to light in such a visual and visceral way, and it becomes very different that we can kind of literally experience this stuff through video format. And I think that's important, that we're seeing and experiencing it much more than we would have previously when this content wasn't so available.
Totally.
That's really fascinating. And so, because the goal of this session is also to help people watching learn a bit from your experience, would it be possible for us to have a chat about the best practices? What are the kind of list of tips or best practices you may have within your team that you use on a daily basis to make sure that your teams both deliver the information and leave some room for innovative formats?
Yeah, I think when you're in a situation of like breaking news with the Ukraine war, particularly the first week, the first few days, and it's incredibly hectic, and you have, as Sam said, like this amount of information and videos. The temptation is like to cut corners, and even in terms, I'm talking about geolocation and reverse image search and that kind of stuff. And I'm pretty like rigorous about that with our team. Like, this is like the basics of everything we do as a sort of OSINT and visual investigation team, is like we need to verify the facts and make sure that this video is located where it says it is. The amount of misinformation on this war is absolutely staggering, like nothing I've ever seen before. From both sides, obviously, with the due differences, but there was a lot of claims and a lot of propaganda on both the Russian and the Ukrainian side, and I think like the sort of good thing about geolocation, metadata, and particularly if you combine all these techniques together, is that you cannot disprove that, and it really doesn't matter what the source is. It could be the Azov battalion or the Russian foreign ministry. It doesn't really matter if you can geolocate and find the metadata for a certain video. So I think like that's the most important thing. And secondly, also understand that not everyone in such a massive organization like CNN understands these things, and it's important to communicate and to be sort of kind and fair to people who are not familiar with this type of reporting, because it's for a heritage media like CNN, it's quite new, and sort of explain how this can contribute to make incredible reporting, and it can also help people on the ground, giving them important intel on where to go. For example, like we had Matthew Chance go to Hostomel after we verified the Hostomel airport helicopter airport attack, and he just went there like the same day, just because we managed to geolocate and verify those videos. And at first it looked incredible. Everyone was in denial. They were like, what, a helicopter attack in Hostomel, like near Kiev? There were no, at the time there were no reports of Russian troops nowhere near Kiev. So it was just within the open source community that it was, you know, verified almost immediately by everyone in the open source community. But it looked incredible. A lot of people, a lot of my colleagues were in denial, but it then was geolocated. We were lucky because we had like a great bosses and marine management that managed to sort of let us work on this front and approve this information for the whole of CNN and to the war then. And then we had a correspondent going there, and we witnessed an amazing scene of Russian troops just next to him. And so this is what you can achieve with this kind of sort of rigorous reporting.
Wow. And what about you, Sam?
Yeah, I think
all the best practices.
That piece that Gianluca was talking about was one of the most amazing pieces I saw of the war, actually, the CNN reporter in Hostomel. It was unbelievable. I think from my perspective, that dividing up the work and having really specific roles on a project helps. I think if you give people specific things that they need to focus on and you take away the noise, you don't make mistakes, or you cut out the chance of making mistakes. And if you've got a team of 5 or 6 being like, right, you focus on the geolocation of these things, you think about how we're going to sort out the video and make sure that the OSINT intelligence we're using is right. And then the other thing I think is, the most important thing is speak to experts. I think Haley touched on it earlier, and we are experts in how to tell stories and in visual storytelling as a subject and how we might bring these things to life. But we'll be covering the Ukraine war 1 minute and we might be covering something else completely different the next. So we're experts in the techniques, but not actually in the subject. And speaking to experts is vital. You need to speak to them all the time and then speak to them again. And people are really, really keen to help. And actually these kind of subjects come into view. And when they do, it's an opportunity for these people to kind of talk, and then that goes away again. And I think you've seen it with COVID, where you've kind of got experts within that field suddenly to the fore, and they're very happy to talk about it because they want the best and the most accurate information to get out there. And with the Ukraine war, whenever I've spoken to experts, they're like, I'm so glad you got in touch, because people don't, and they publish stuff that's wrong and it's infuriating. And they're very happy if you give them enough time and you ask the right questions to help you tell stories in the right way for readers. So speak to experts all the time. You don't have to know everything. It's better if you don't, in fact. Get in touch with people. If you're lucky enough to work for CNN or the FT, then it opens doors automatically. But if you get in touch with people, then you'd be surprised at how often they're willing to communicate with you about their subjects.
Awesome. And just to go one step further, after giving some advice on the best practices, what advice could you give in terms of the tools that people in their newsrooms who are trying to innovate could use to step up their game, if you like? Anything you'd recommend?
Gianluca, do you want to
go? So rather than talking about like specific tools, I think like there are, I'm talking from an open source kind of perspective. I think there are so many toolkits available that anyone can access. And I would recommend, obviously, the Bellingcat spreadsheet with all the sort of open source tools that it's, I think, up to date now. Like it was out of date a few years ago, but then they updated it, and it's absolutely amazing. And First Draft has recently changed name. They have 2 different toolkits, one for basic sort of beginner's guide to open source, and the other one is more advanced. And on YouTube, you can see the Benjamin Strick's guides to open source as well, guide to geolocation and other amazing techniques used. In terms of what we use, like again as open source, I was actually surprised at how useful NASA firms fire map is, because it's often a tool that is not very used by open source people and looked kind of snapped on. But for Ukraine, it's incredibly useful, and it gave us like kind of up-to-date information on fires that were happening on specific sites after rocket attack, for example. And they can even give you information on the time frame. So sometimes it's like less than 6 hours ago, and then you can sort of cross-reference it with videos you see on that you're trying to sort of locate on social media. So that's another tool that we found incredibly useful. I would say that just go and look on those like amazing toolkits available for everyone, and just put your hands on those tools.
Thank you so much. That's a great list, actually.
I would agree. That's a fantastic list, and a great place to start. Mapbox has been really useful for us. It's a brilliant tool for kind of intuitive tool for mapping, and it works brilliantly across devices. So it's actually very smooth and very powerful. We've told a lot of stories using Mapbox as a base. It's also very customizable. And then Figma is also something that we use a lot. It's a design tool, but it's great for collaborating. You can put a lot of stuff in there. You can kind of storyboard what you want to do, and that's also very intuitive. So when you're first thinking about how you might want to tell a story, Figma is helpful. But also, I think the kind of key reporting techniques that you need for this sort of visual storytelling are not that dissimilar than the ones you need for great reporting. And I think that's one of the key things, or the key messages that I would want to say, is the visuals can't carry the content. Like, the content has to be good enough on its own. And you have to do the reporting, and you have to get the on the ground stuff, and you have to be exposing things and revealing things that are world class, that go with the quality of the journalism that you produce elsewhere. You can't be, it can't be whizzy visuals that carry bad words. And I think that the key message there is to make sure you're thinking about that too. Like, what is the story you're telling, and are you speaking to the right people? Are you getting the content that you need? And I think the examples that Gianluca's shown are great ones of doing that, as well as the visuals, that they're revealing a story which needs to be told. So think about your reporting as well as your visualizing skills.
Amen to that.
And I'm just curious, like, how do both of you come up with your ideas and make sure that you're still kind of in touch with the people who are really feeling this war, who are stuck in Ukraine or on the ground? Like, how do you keep that human touch when you come up with these ideas? Is it about talking to sources, or is it about, I don't know, taking a break?
It's a tough one. It's one of the stories we covered is like very early on. There have been several reports on this. Is the story about the deportations from Mariupol to Russia, and we were actually in touch with a lot of people who managed to sort of escape from Russia, I think like that's one of the stories that stayed with us the most, because the kind of experience that they had of being shelled in Mariupol, having to hide those underground bunkers, and then all of a sudden being told that there was a way out, and the people were telling them there was a way out were Russians and sometimes like from Chechen army, and then like not knowing where you're going. So they were pretty much in the hands of these people, like just carrying them on buses and sending them out to these Russian filtration camps, where they had to experience and your really tough interrogation methods, perquisition, and of tattoos, and a really horrible experience. And I think like the story we publish on deportation, I can quickly show it, but it's you'll see it lets people speak of their experience themselves, like their voices. I'll show you quickly. Hang on, I was sharing the screen, and now you go. So so this is the story, and our amazing digital writer Eliza, I think, did a great job in sort of showing visually, but also just simply letting people speak about their experience and combining it with, again, like graphics about their path, and this, like, just something as simple as like these pull quotes side by side with the images. I think it's like makes for a really compelling story, and I think like there are a lot of nuances to this. At least there were a lot of nuances when we started covering it, because a lot of people were saying, "Oh, they were like they weren't like forced, like they didn't use force to transport them, but actually these people had no other option, and they had to basically they used the Russians and the Chechens used like psychological methods to sort of force them to leave. So it was a very blurred line. And I think it's a really powerful story, and something that sort of really put us in touch with people who were suffering and that were forcibly taken from their land.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Thank you. We didn't get direct questions to you guys in the comment section yet on YouTube, but let me ask you this. Could you give tips on how to pitch those innovative projects to an editor? How easy is it to get it commissioned? Because some of them take some resources and time. And secondly, does the reusability of a project has a lot to play in this?
Good question. I think pitching them, you use the content you have. So if you're pitching a visual story, then use the visuals. I think make sure you're armed with the content that you want to show and you want to use for readers, and I think that really helps. And it's a powerful way of making an argument for what you're trying to do. And then be excited about what you're doing. Like, be excited about the story you're telling, and make sure you're communicating why this is an important story that needs to be told and why it lends itself to a visual story. One of the things that we found difficult at the start of the war was coming up with an idea, saying that we wanted to do it, and saying we needed about a week and a half, and then other people pitching those ideas, because it's a big newsroom and we've got reporters all over the place and we were covering big stories. So I think there was quite a nice moment where the foreign editor said to me, "Oh, I think next time we'll just give you the space to do this when you come up with a story idea. And like, you earned that right to do that. You can't just say that." And that's something that happens when you can show what you can do through this sort of storytelling. So that was a challenge for us, was carving out the space to tell these stories. But I think use your visuals and make sure you're very excited about what you're pitching and why it needs to be told.
Sorry, my laptop died.
I saw that. I was asking, like, do you have tips on pitching those innovative projects? And also asked a question about how much you reuse some of the techniques. And
I mean, I think Sam covered it. I think visually when you pitch a story, and like the maternity hospital, I think it was a great example for us, because that's exactly the way we conceived the story. Like, we wanted like to show like via this 3D reconstruction that it was a civilian infrastructure, that there were no soldiers around, that there were civilians, that were cars parked, and that it was operating at the moment. And I think like we really conveyed that with the 3D model, and the videos, integrating with the videos that of the hospital after the attack. And it's really testament to the great job that the design team has done. Like particularly, we were thinking exactly of showing that the 3D model, as it pans out and stops in showing the video from inside the hospital looking outside, and that's exactly what they did. So yeah, think visually and try to sort of get the design team on board on your project, and I think again, I think 3D modeling is also a great storytelling device. So yeah, this is my advice basically.
Well, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Sam and Gianluca, for this. It's been awesome hearing your views. I know that, Gianluca, you have to run to another meeting now, so it's been great having you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks for coming, guys.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Okay, thank you for everyone for sticking around for the last session, which is the lightning talks. So we have two for you this afternoon or this evening. We have, the first one is by Anastasia Shevchenko from the Fix Media, and she's going to be discussing War Mode Messenger, how Ukrainian media are relying on Telegram in the time of war. So, Anastasia, I'm just going to add you to the stream, and you're going to go for it.
Thank you, Tara, for this introduction. Let me share my screen real quick. Sorry. Hi, everyone. So Telegram was already quite popular in recent years, and the war in Ukraine only amplified its importance. So we at the Fix analyzed the biggest Ukrainian independent media Telegram channels to see what changed with Russian invasion of Ukraine. So the number one is that the news media ramped up posting on Telegram. As you can see, all of the Ukrainian media started posting more frequently in comparison to January. And this is understandable. War means that people need to be constantly updated. Sometimes people's lives depend on these messages, as media Telegram channels not only post news about war front, but also signals about air alerts, post about evacuation information, or repost important reminders from the government. And with DOS attacks on news websites and restrictions on other social media platforms, Telegram became a more convenient way to transmit this information for people who are really in need. Number two is that what we noticed is that Ukrainian Telegram channels have started speaking to larger audiences. For some channels like Union, the audience grew more than 30 times since January. What is interesting is that the substantial jump happened in the first days and weeks of war, which proves how much this was an important tool and information for everyone. What we also noticed is that all of the media achieved a high reach on Telegram during the first weeks of war. However, the most successful case was Spina News, which is a public broadcaster, and it showed the best results. This happened mainly because they used a large network of regional channels, which provides a lot of coverage from local communities, and it is fast. With thank you and my goodbyes is that a note of caution that even though Telegram was extremely important to this situation for Ukrainians and for survival of Ukrainian media, it is all social media is a double-edged sword, as Russian propagandist channel also kind of there and spreading their misinformation. So thank you. Here was my very quick pitch, and yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you, Anastasia. And now for our second lightning talk, we have Sarah Cooper. Sarah, thanks for joining us. Sarah is technical project manager for My Country Talks, which is a project run by Zeit Online. Her talk is called Reducing Political Polarization and Humanizing Data from Ukraine. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. So I don't have anything to share. I'll just talk. So at My Country Talks, what we do is we match people together with totally different political opinions for a one-on-one conversation. Participants answer 7 to 9 yes or no questions about controversial political issues. And then we find another participant who said the opposite, and we introduce them to have a conversation, which helps them to develop empathy and reduce polarization in polarized political contexts. And a big part of what we do is we collaborate with media to run these events. We are from Zeit Online, which is a German daily online newspaper, and we work with other media around the world to engage their readers in these conversations, but also to publish stories that feature their participants. We know that at a certain point, it's hard for the human brain to process data, especially large numbers. But studies show that when you can accompany statistics, especially statistics about impact of things like war or climate change or the economy, if you can emotionalize that through the stories of actual people or through the experiences of quote unquote normal people, it tends to help people remember and understand that data much better. So, but as journalists, sometimes it's really hard to know who to feature. You can always call up a politician or a professor of political science, but it's those really human stories that make the data relate to your readers' lives. So as a journalist who's participating in an event, you can see all of the participants who signed up and look through their profiles and actually call them up and do portraits and share their experience or feature them in stories. So for example, right now we're running an event in Germany called Germany Talks, and all of the questions are about the war in Ukraine. And we're featuring those participant stories as a way to emotionalize the data about the war. For example, Germany is discussing potentially reinstating mandatory conscription into the army. So alongside an article about that, we can actually feature a real young woman who signed up and is actually serving in the army right now. And she has a very strong opinion about conscription. So we can actually share her story and the experiences that shaped her opinion alongside that data.
Marvelous.
Yeah.
Of views and experiences. That is awesome. And that brings
you both.
yeah, thank you very much to you guys. We will make sure to share the links also, Anastasia, to your stuff in the comments. This is the end of the afternoon. Can you believe this, Tara?
No. Oh God, no. Yeah, it's exciting. Thanks everyone for coming on today.
Thanks a lot. And so, as we were saying at the beginning of this, we've recorded all 3 sessions, and we will be making them into podcasts and also articles online that will summarize some of the tips, examples, and best practices that we've mentioned through the sessions, in hope of making some resources for everybody in the community. It's been great joining you. Thanks to everybody who's been involved, right? That's the time when we say that. Thanks to EJC, thanks to the datajournalism.com for partnering with Sigma Awards on this. It's been incredible. I hope you at home enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time, right?
Yep. And also, just a reminder, this will be turned into a podcast, so stay tuned. And thank you, Marianne, and thank you, EJC and Google News Initiative.
Yay. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.